Recording on. Good evening, councillors and staff and visitors and those watching online. Welcome to our Agenda Forum. Agenda Forums are specifically for agenda items which are to be considered by Council at the next ordinary meeting of Council. Agenda Forums are not decision-making forums. They provide an opportunity for councillors to be equally informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of such items at the next ordinary Council meeting for formal consideration. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed. The recording will also be archived and made available on the Council's website after the meeting. If you choose to participate in a meeting during public question time and deputation time, it is assumed that your consent is given for the audio to be recorded. Please keep your comments respectful to the Council and other members of the community. Visual images of the public will not be captured. Councillor Scanlon on leave of absence, but as you can see, she's joined us this evening. Welcome, councillors. And we have apologies from Councillor Rod Henderson and Councillor Mel Congerton. Are there any others, Madam Acting CEO?
Not that I've been advised, but I believe Councillor Prodovnik is an apology.
Thank you. Any other apologies? No. Declarations of financial and proximity interest and interest affecting impartiality.
Mr Mayor, City officers advised a number of councillors that they may have a possible interest in item C1.5, which is Councillor Kiley's notice of motion around changing the local planning scheme to reflect Guildford. We have received from Councillor Richardson a financial interest as she owns a state heritage listed property in Guildford. Councillor Scanlon has declared a financial interest as she owns and part owns houses in Guildford. Councillor Johnson has advised he owns a house in Guildford, and Councillor Kiley has advised he owns a house in Guildford. Officers have applied to the Minister for Local Government to allow these councillors to remain and participate in the council meeting next week, and this is in accordance with section 569 of the Act, and a response is pending. I have also received interests from Councillor Catalano. In item 4.1, she has declared a financial interest that is employment related, and in item 4.2, also a financial interest that is employment related. From Councillor Jones, I have received an impartiality interest for item 4.2 as she is a volunteer assisting with serving of meals. And from yourself, Mr Mayor, a financial interest in item 13.4 as Westport is a customer of your company, and item 4.2 an impartiality interest as you are on the committee of the applicant.
Any other declarations from councillors or staff? Councillor Pellick, yours is in item
4.2 impartiality and 13.4 financial.
and you'll submit the form. Thank you. Councillor Kiley, you're next, I think.
Guildford entry signs, Mayor, just an impartiality on that one.
Thank you. Send the form. Councillor Johnson.
Mr Mayor, I'm going to declare an impartiality interest in Councillor Kiley's item C1.5.
Impartiality. Okay. Councillor.
At this stage, yeah, Mr Mayor, at this stage until we have advice from the Minister as to whether we can participate.
So, Councillor Richards, you've already got an impartiality on that one. Financial pending advice from the Minister also. Okay. Any others? None. Thank you, councillors. Public question time. Questions relating to reports contained in the agenda. Questions of which notice has been given. I have nil. Any questions without notice from the gallery? There are none. Reports and motions for which previous notice has been given. Presentations and deputations. Part 1, deputations in accordance with the procedures for the public participation at agenda forums during the COVID-19 crisis. Written deputations are preferred. All written deputations received by 2 p.m. Tuesday, 8th of December were provided to councillors via email on Tuesday evening and published on the City's website. A number of deputations submitted after 5 p.m. Tuesday, 8th of December were provided to council via email prior to the agenda forum this afternoon. All deputations have been advised of the time provided to address council. Takes us the first item is item 13.4, the proposed use and associated development of artificial insemination centre at lot 178, number 46, Gaston Road, Ballsbrook. I'll hand the chair over to the Deputy Mayor, as both Councillor McCulloch and myself declared a financial interest.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll wait for you and Councillor McCulloch to leave the chamber. Councillors, this item's on page 15 of the agenda. We have 3 in-person, or maybe 4 in-person deputations, and I call the first speaker Mr. Robert Lyons. Mr. Lyons? Okay then, thank you. Caroline, can I just get your surname, please? Thank you. If you can just turn the talk or the speak button on so the red light on the microphone comes on. Thank you. And if you can start your deputation. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. I object to this proposal. All through this West Port proposal, we've been told by the city staff that odour, noise, stable fly, infestation, animal cruelty, drop in land value, and environmental damage, all 227 complaints, are very low and won't affect the nearby residents or future development. Which makes you ask yourself, who are the city staff planners working for? It's certainly not the Bullsbrook residents. It gives you the impression that there's more to this outcome than ruining nearby residents, businesses, lifestyle, and Bullsbrook's future development by using West Port's paid consultants' documents with disclaimers which clearly understates the impacts of noise, odours and land devaluation. Boar squealing understated by 40% and pig faeces stored for 18 weeks will clearly emit strong odours and a breeding ground for stablefly, a declared pest that travels 20 kilometres and over and will impact surrounding businesses. There is clearly a conflict of interest with no Shire independent checking done. The advice used to inform council decision has mainly originated from the DPIRD, which has a massive conflict of interest, as their role is to promote the WA pork industry where there is no EPA response. The city staff planners were quick to respond that no information was given on why the previous piggery was shut down, but are holding back information that EPA have placed it under a unique case management system, meaning they haven't agreed with the project. This can be seen in the bias conclusion and recommendations. Councillors, this is a decision that needs to be taken seriously, as the decision you are about to make, if it is to go ahead, is clearly sending a message to landholders that it is acceptable to construct piggeries 300 metres from other residences and 60 metres from other
You have
boundaries
1 minute left, thank you.
for up to 500 pigs, which falls below EPA DWER guidelines, therefore devaluing more land and its usage for rural pursuits and other developments, and creating even bigger problems. Finally, put yourself in our position. Would you be happy a large company such as West Pork pushing their way into your area and saying it won't affect you, which could happen if this is passed? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Being no questions, I thank you for your deputation and call upon the next speaker, Mr. John Lee. Thank you, Mr. Lee. You also have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for letting me voice my concerns with this proposal.
And Mr. Lee, if you could just talk into the microphone so everyone can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I wish to voice my concerns with the Shire of Swan staff recommendation that this proposal should be passed by councillors. I have a problem that, as an adjacent landowner, I feel that the buffer zone is providing a prejudice to me as a landowner and a ratepayer, because the use of my land, according to the rural zoning, will be affected by this buffer zone that extends from where the piggery is to be placed 60 metres from Morley Drive or Morley Road. If I wish to place a residence which is close to Morley Road, which is close to the power for connection, it decreases the cost of construction. If I want to place my house in the most ideal position, it's within approximately 100 metres of that piggery. Now, if that piggery goes ahead, that is going to prejudice my ability to construct a house on that location. I claim that's prejudiced to me by allowing this to go ahead. I guess that is contradictory to some of the guidelines which councillors need to take into consideration when they give that decision. I also feel that the site selection, according to the Department of Primary Industries report, quite clearly states in 5 separate occasions where this is not an ideal location for this proposal. It is not 100 metres from a public road, it is 60. It consists to be constructed on coastal sandy soils, which is not recommended. It has a very low phosphorus retention index, which again is another proposal in the report that makes it an unsuitable site. It's within a wetland catchment of Ellenbrook, which also they agree that and recommend that it's not a suitable site for intensive piggery. So there are 5 instances where, in the report, it clearly states, and I might add
1 minute left, thank you.
Westport were quite heavy contributors into that report. They themselves have recommended that it's an unsuitable site. Now, this proposal has been, according to a Section 38 referral, now being a case management system with the Environmental Protection Authority, case number 17924, and it has been referred for the purposes that we feel that there should be scientific method that's involved in determining what sort of mitigation is to be assessed and how confident we can be that those mitigation policies are actually designed in a way that it is going to mitigate whatever it is amenity that's going to be adversely affected. We don't agree with AORA or Reverberate Consulting about noise and odour. Also, the State Industrial Buffer Policy says that any proposal that is expecting to produce 1,000 tonne of waste per year or more, of which we haven't been or given an estimate of how much waste is going to be produced, but if it is greater than 1,000 tonnes, and through my estimates it is more than 1,000 tonnes, then they are required to have a 1,000 metre buffer zone, not 130 metres or 300 metres. It's 1,000 metres under State Industrial Buffer Policy.
Thank you, Mr Lee. That's the end of your 3 minutes. How much longer have you got to go?
Oh, a minute?
I'll allow that extra minute.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. Other considerations, animal welfare. The temperature at Bullsbrook is a hot climate. It's constantly above 35 degrees from December through to March, and quite often above 40 degrees Celsius. Now, there is no air conditioning in these sheds, and there is no exercise area for these boars. So there's no facility for them to act within their natural environment, and that will increase the amount of stress that the animal suffers. And the more stress that they suffer, the greater they squeal, the greater the noise. So in instances where an animal is stressed, particularly a pig, they will have a natural response, and that will be not only grunting but squealing. And if that's more than the estimated 10%, which is being communicated by Westport to Reverberate, then the assumptions which they modelled their noise modelling estimates will be incorrect by quite a bit. Pig squeals at 115 decibels, not 80. If it squeals 20% of the time, you're doubling the amount of time that it's moving outside the recommended noise limitations of the noise regulations. So that's another area that the EPA, upon a greater assessment, will determine the level of confidence in the prediction of impacts and the success of the proposed mitigation that have been put forward by Westport. Now, they're also concerned about...
Thank you, Mr Lee. That's you've had 5.5 minutes.
Thank you very much.
I've given you 2 minutes after I said I'd give you a minute.
I
Thank you
it,
for your
sir.
deputation.
Thank you very much.
I'll now call
I've got
upon
questions.
Councillor Johnson. Sorry, you have questions of Mr Lee?
Yes.
Sorry, Mr Lee, if you'd come back to the podium. Councillor Johnson, you may ask your questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. Yeah, very interesting deputation. Can you tell me a bit more about these 1,000 metre, 350 metre and 100 metre buffer zones?
Well, the State Industrial Buffer Policy states that, and if you wish to refer into the Department of Primary Industries report, which is on existing and proposed piggeries, if you produce 1,000 tonnes of of waste or composted waste, they require that you have a buffer zone of at least 1,000 metres. I have the report with me. It's in Table 2, I think, Subnote 4. Quite clearly states that that is actually a buffer policy of the state. So we haven't been given any estimates of how much tonnage of waste is being produced by this facility. Now, my estimates on a study by Jay Ulbrich and from the state of Illinois, which is the whole capital virtually of the world, they predict that a mature sow will produce up to 30 kilograms a day of waste. If you multiply that by 188 bores over a full year, you get about 2,001 tonnes of waste. So I'm a bit suspicious that we haven't been supplied any estimates of the tonnage of this waste. We've only been given a possible mitigation policy that they'll go through a composting procedure, of which they will compost a given amount and then transport it off-site within 3 months.
Next question.
So-
Thanks, Councillor.
The 300-metre buffer zone was a recommendation from the Department of Primary Industry, once again in that table, from the closest residents.
You're saying if there's 1,000 tonnes of pig manure produced a year, then the 1,000-metre buffer should apply?
Yes, if it's 1,000 tonnes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
No, I'm not an expert on pig shit, Mr Mayor.
But
Thank
you
you.
can refer to state industrial buffer
Or
policy.
perhaps if you could email that to all councillors.
Yes, yes, yep.
Thank you. Now call upon the next speakers, which will be Mr Neil Ferguson and Mr Mark Szabo. You're both speaking, gentlemen? No, just one, sir. Just one? Then you'll have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I'm just hoping to make a short deputation on the proposal, as we've been here before, and to answer any new questions that elected members may have since the last time we were here. I also have Mr Ferguson here, the CEO of SPORC, in case there are any questions that he can help with. As councillors will understand, we've been significantly delayed in getting a decision on our application since the original council meeting in October, and it's Westpork's intent. They want to help elected members with any queries that you may have to satisfy any concerns that you may have with the proposal. We've noted the updated information in Council's report, and we see that you have received no response or information from DWER, the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, regarding the request for information about the previous piggery that operated on the site. We suspect this is because small piggeries at that time were not subject to licensing requirements, and there were potentially no records at DWER for them to provide to you. Further to that, we do want to reiterate this proposal is not for a traditional open-style piggery. This is for a boar milking facility that forms part of the artificial insemination process used for pig rearing. The entire operation is housed inside one large shed that can accommodate up to 188 boars. There are no outdoor pens and no outdoor roaming areas for the animals. The fact that the animals are always housed inside the shed significantly reduces the potential for impacts on nearby rural properties. It makes the cleaning and containment so much easier. And I think, as we mentioned last time in our deputation, that from an operational perspective, the vast majority of odours that come from piggery operations come from the use of open ponds that are used for the anaerobic breakdown of waste. This AI facility does not require or propose any of those ponds. Westpork fully understands the importance of being a good neighbour, as it is clearly within their best business interests to limit potential for any issues arising regarding their operations that will affect their relationship with their community and in turn the operation of their business. And they look to limit those issues. That being said, Westpork prides itself on being particularly quick to react to any approach that they get from nearby neighbours or authorities in regards to problems or issues that arise with their operations. Whilst these occasions have been very limited, Westpork has always worked with any neighbouring landowners to quickly address these issues that have been raised at any time. And this would be the same if this facility was to develop any issues with adjoining landowners. We also noted that there was a question posed by a councillor regarding the issue of stable fly in the minutes of the previous meeting. Westpork want to assure council that it's aware of stable fly and has been actively involved in the working groups regarding the required management protocols for eliminating the breeding of stable fly. While most instances of stable fly do come from operations involving vegetable production and chicken litter, Westport is aware of the management and operational requirements in this regard and want to assure Council that if this facility did happen to breed stable fly, the company would be held liable and would be subject to prosecution. On that basis, they take the issue very seriously, as they do all environmental requirements for their operations. We're hoping this information may assist councillors in determining this application, and obviously we're here with Neil to answer any further questions that you may have.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr Szabo, councillors? Councillor Richardson first.
Thank you. Mr Szabo, just a quick question regarding, just wondering what's the working lifespan of the use of a bore?
Couldn't tell you.
What age, and then what point do they stop using it? 2.5 years. Sorry?
2.5 years.
So how old is the bore when they first comes? 6 months, and then just for 2.5 years. And then the process of the bore after? Sorry? And also, just in respect to the discussion we were having regarding the elimination of waste, the buffer zone that was up for discussion for the 1,000 metres, is that something you can elaborate on?
The site doesn't produce anywhere near the 1,000 tonnes.
So for the 188 bores, what would your expected tonnage be? How do we estimate that then, or what do you have as a guideline?
Well, an interesting point is that the calculation done by Mr Lee was for 30 kilos or something per day per pig. The pigs are only fed about 2.5 kilos of food per day, so the opportunity to give 30 is just not possible.
Thank you.
Councillor Scanlon, you're next.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. My question is also on the waste produced. So I noticed in the vehicle access report it says there'll be 100 cubic metres of waste every 6 weeks. I'm wondering if you could tell me the weight of 100 cubic metres of waste, please.
About 0.5 or 0.6, so half that.
Sorry, 0.6 of a tonne? Sorry?
0.5 or 0.6, the ratio to the,
okay.
cubic.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Yes. Councillor Catalano, followed by Councillor Johnson.
Oh, thank you. It's less than 1,000 tonnes, so how much less than 1,000 tonnes? Yeah, I think that information would be great if we could have that information to councillors before next week, because just saying it's less than 1,000 tonnes, it could be, in fact, just fractionally less, which is effectively 1,000 tonnes. So a bit more information on that as
we're
well.
Happy to provide that.
And the other thing is, I didn't realise that the facility wasn't going to be air conditioned. And I wonder, how much noise is going to be emitted by stressed animals in the heat out there. Do you know, it is actually quite a good point, that whole idea of actually these animals in the heat, in that environment. I mean, obviously there's going to be a lot of stress and unhappy animals. So that is a concern to me, I have to say, and I'd like to have some, why isn't the environment going to be a little bit more conducive to so many animals penned up in that small space?
Is that all right, Mr?
Absolutely. We're here to get information.
So the facility will actually be cooled and air conditioned. It's actually an evaporative air conditioner. So one of the concerns has been fan noise. So at one end of the shed is your traditional evaporation pads, no different to a swampy or whatever, and at the other end of it is the fans that's pulling it out. So the conventional air conditioner on this roof will be pushing air in. We're actually drawing air through the cool cells and out through the fans. So the animals are cooled. It'll be on a 40-degree day, we will get probably 12 to 13 degrees as long as it's not too humid. So it'll be mid to high 20s in terms of the shed on a really hot day.
12 to 13 degrees less than like 40 or whatever it is
less than
outside,
the outside,
42 outside. And what about, I thought there was an issue with evaporative air conditioners in humid conditions. They don't work as well and not as effective. What's your view on that?
So it's there's on a humid day they do not work as effectively, and that's no different to you and I. And then it's wind speed as well going over there. So it's two-pronged. It's got wind going over the animals as well as a cooling effect. So it's traditional. It's the typical cooling system you'll see on all pig and poultry, or most pig and poultry sheds that are built new today. Yep.
Councillor Johnson, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Deputy Mayor. Just thinking again about the amount of pig manure that's being produced here. So we're saying that they're fed about 2 kilograms a day. Is that right? So if I'm assuming a kind of 2.5, keeping the calculations easy, sort of mass balances there. I guess mature pigs, 2 kilograms in, about 2 kilograms go out. How many pigs are there?
188.
188. So I'm getting 167 tonnes a year. Does that sound about right?
I couldn't tell you. I haven't calculated.
Okay.
You're in the ballpark in terms of feed and faeces going out, but what you've got to do is you've actually got to combine that with the litter that's the sawdust that's going on the floor, because there's a sawdust, and so that's when I talk total litter, off the top of my head here and now I think it's around 800 or 900, but I need to go and check that. But a couple are that you've got the feed and then you've got the spent litter that you need to combine to get to total manure volume.
So 800 or 900 tonnes a year?
Yeah.
So if we had that 267, we're getting quite close to 1,000 tonnes a year.
No, that's
including.
That's the
it's including.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. My next question actually relates to the noise. So I've heard one gentleman advise that they believe that a pig squeal is 116 decibels, but in the report it says 50 decibels. Can you explain the difference?
So probably the best example is we've recently finished a noise study at our Pinjarra site. We had a noise complaint there related to fans, and the neighbour never once complained about the squealing of the pigs, and on that site there's 5,500 pigs. He did complain about noise on a regular basis in terms of fans, so we commissioned a company to do a report. They actually set up monitoring in his bedroom, on his front veranda, and at the piggery. And this farm's about 500 metres from the fans, and the noise in his bedroom was below threshold levels, below reportable levels. It was below detectable levels, and it was proven that the noise that he was hearing was not coming from the piggery. And we presented that information to him, and he's accepted that the issue that he has is more related to a tinnitus type problem than the piggery. But that was the exercise that we went through there.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all from me.
Councillor Richardson, you're next.
Thank you. I just had another 2 quick questions. What size is the piggery in Pinjarra in relation to the 5,500?
It has 5,500 pigs.
So what's the size of the property?
I think there's 150 acres, ballpark.
And with the 188 boars, are you intending to increase that, or is there a limit on the size of the property and the number of boars that you can have?
So, in terms of the capacity of the boar stud, that's enough. There's enough boars in there to supply semen for every sow in the state, so it's catering for not only our current usage but growth. We will not expand that beyond that size because from a distribution and a health point of view, so it is where it is. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Kiley.
Just on, sorry, to get you back up again, just on that last point in terms of expansion, you talked about from a health point of view. Why would an expansion of the pigs there be a health issue?
So the way our model is created is we have dedicated sites in terms of breeder, grower sites, boar sites, and we keep them separated, and we only sit there and distribute genetics through tadpoles or semen. And from that point of view, we're not going to put sows on there or growing pigs or anything like that. It is a boar stud to distribute genetics through our organisation and through other producers in the state. And it can cater for the full state's production at that size. So there's...
Sorry to ask again, but you specifically said it'd be a health issue. I'm just wondering what the health issue would be if you got more pigs there on site.
Oh, the health issue is my pig
To
health.
the pigs.
Oh, yeah, not human health. Sorry, pig health. Sorry.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. Just one more question. Just looking at the layout of the facility on the plot of land, I'm questioning why you put it close to one boundary, or just a setback of 60 metres, when you could have put it right in the centre of the plot of land. Is there any reason?
If we put it in the centre of the property, it would have been closer to the southern neighbour, so it was about keeping it kind of there. From a distance to boundaries, there was a question earlier on around the 1,000 metres, the 300 metres and so forth. If you go back through the guidelines, there were rules up until 2018 which said 100 metres from a boundary and 1,000 metres from the closest town. That was replaced in 2018 to a calculation using an S factor. So now there's only limits is to closest to a rural dwelling, being 300, and 750 to a town. And the reason they introduced this S factor calculation was under the old regime I could go and put 50,000 pigs a kilometre from town, which isn't practical, whereas if you do the modelling in terms of odour and wind and the type of piggery that's been built, whether the pond's covered, that sort of thing, that ultimately determines the buffer zone. And that's why this S factor was taken into account rather than the prescribed limits of a kilometre.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Richardson.
Just another quick question, just regarding the composting of the pig carcasses within that sealed and bundled concrete composting bunker. How big is this bunker, and how many pigs can it accommodate, and what would you expect to, how often would you be using that bunker?
So we're likely to lose 1 to 2 boars a year. Boar mortality is quite low. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact size. Can I come back to you on that one?
If you could
please?
provide
Sorry.
that information for all councillors, that'd be good.
Sorry, can't remember that off the top of my head.
Any other questions, councillors? Being no other questions, I thank you for your deputations. I thank all people in the gallery for their deputations. We've got more deputations coming in, so if I could ask perhaps Amanda or the security man to walk these people out. If we can recall the Mayor and Councillor McCulloch.
Just another quick question.
I see your question, hand up. I thank you for your attendance, and once you vacate the chambers, we'll be able to bring the next group of deputations in. Thank you.
Just like to confirm with staff that my earlier notification for alternative motion for 13.4 will still stand.
Minute clerk, please. Or if not,
Thank
you're
you.
advising us now. Thank you. We'll just wait for the Mayor and Councillor McCulloch to return, and he'll take over the meeting. We're going on to Part B, item 4.1, councillors, on page 140 of the agenda. It's the proposed housing development, Devon Street, Woodbridge.
Thank you, councillors. Our next item is item 4.1, the proposed housing development lot 1, 2, 3, 4 and 178 Devon Street in Woodbridge. The first speakers are Ms Lee Symington and Sylvia Malesi, who are representing the Woodbridge Ratepayers Association, and because there are a large number of people being represented and bundled into one, this deputation will go for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Street, this is a very... Oh, sorry. How about that? Okay, we're ready. Sorry. Here we go. Good evening, everybody. This particular issue is a very difficult issue because we have got two very important issues that are at loggerheads with each other on this issue. Homelessness and the environment. My name is Lee Symington. I'm an architect. I have 25 years' experience as an architect. I run my own business. I sit on the design review panel for the City of Bayswater, and I am the course coordinator for the Bachelor of Architecture at Curtin University. So, this planning application that we have put in, unfortunately, is so weak and lacking in information that if it were presented to our panel, we would have to request huge additional amounts of information. In addition, as I said, this project has two issues that come at loggerheads with each other. In here, we're all good people, and we want the best for the environment, the community, and those who live more complicated, difficult lives and find themselves without a home. We all want to be seen to doing the right thing. We do, you do, My Homes do. We all want to be seen to doing the right thing. The architect of My Homes needs to be congratulated and awarded for her continuing selfless giving to an idea that seems really good on the surface and superficially ticks all the boxes on this project. However, unfortunately, when you scratch the surface, there are numerous difficulties in this particular site and this model of housing. This project is meant to be win-win-win, a win for the homeless, a win for the community and a win for the environment. Unfortunately, at this moment, it's lose, lose, lose. The environment loses, another small piece of wilderness on our poor forgotten Helena River. The homeless don't win, as they'll be placed at the back end of a cul-de-sac, out of sight, without any real support, in a very old-fashioned model of housing. They will be left living in close proximity, and the community of City of Swan will be left with many issues to sort out. As I previously stated, I am an architect and I sit on the design review panel for the City of Bayswater. And this planning application would be asked for more information. It is so lacking that it does not actually fit the basic planning regulations, and I want to point out these inadequacies right now. This proposal was submitted without a survey. A survey tells you where every tree is, where every level is, and the first submission put 30 houses on the site, taking out every living tree, blade of grass with retaining walls 5 metres high. Our architect came out and had a look and said, how about 17 houses? Now those houses, even on that plan, the parking reverses into trees. There's not actually a road that tells you where you reverse. And it just says a little thing, retain tree. Do we want this level put on an important piece of land that is zoned parks and rec, an important part of our natural biodiversity? In addition, there's no indication of the type, height or extent of fencing. There are no storerooms. There is no indication where all the bins are going to go on the street. There's no plan showing precisely where all these things fit. My friends, this is precisely what planning is meant for. It is to show us these things so that the community knows what is happening in advance. It's unacceptable to put in a planning application without all these bits of information. The level of detail, inaccuracy and aptitude in the drawings submitted, unfortunately, is reflected on all levels of this site. This proposal must be rejected. A site model that shows a win-win situation is what we need. We can't go back once the ground is all dug up on this site.
Yeah, 1 minute, Ms Symington.
Okay. This project needs to be set up to succeed. This project needs more planning and thought and a more appropriate site. We want to see more housing and my homes and my architects succeed. I'd like to just let you know that they have 2 pilots already happening, one in Vic Park and one in Fremantle. We do not need a valuable piece of our biodiversity put up for a pilot project. David Attenborough, if you watch A Life on Our Planet on Netflix, has seen 70% of the world's wilderness disappear in his lifetime. He said this is happening through a result of bad planning and human error, and that we can make changes now to improve this. I implore you, on behalf of the Woodbridge ratepayers, that you completely reject this application. We say good intention, wrong location.
Thank you, Ms Semmington. Well, this is a joint deputation, so... Ms Malesi, thank you.
Hi everyone. My name's Sylvia. I also live on Devon Street. I'm also part of the Woodbridge Ratepayers Association.
Could you just speak closer to your microphone?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yep, okay. Bit nervous, sorry guys.
That's right, it's a tough gig.
I've got 30 years experience in the community services sector. I hold a social work degree, I hold a social science degree, I hold postgraduate degrees in child protection and also in counselling. I've run crisis accommodation services, I've run transitional services, I've run independent living services, I've run drug and alcohol services, both for adults and, for youth. So they're detox services and residential facilities. I've also been involved in the drug courts. My second last iteration was as a child protection worker, and I did that for over 10 years. Currently, I'm working to train social workers in how to be better providers for people as this client group is. Okay. What I've brought before you is the 50 Homes and 50 Lives, 50 Homes. It is an accredited report. It has 3 years of data available for you to peruse. I will leave it. I think it is well worth you looking at. It is based on the first Housing First response. The model talks about a scattered site accommodation. What that means, councillors, is that people who are homeless are integrated into the society, into a location that they are familiar with, close to their support networks, and into a home that suits their basic needs. This is a forced environment where people don't get a choice. This program is very successful because it uses a scattered home approach. There are some Housing First approaches that are co-located, but however, those co-located sites are mixed tenancies. They have homeless people on site, they have renters who fall in the low to medium price range, and then they have home ownership on there. Again, the purpose is about integrating people into the community. This proposal doesn't do that. The second point I want to talk about is the location, because I think that that's really vital. This is pushed out of sight, out of mind, into a back corner, into Woodbridge. We have people, we are 800 metres from the closest train station. We are 1,800 metres from the closest shopping centre. We are over 2 kilometres away from the social supports that people will need. Drug and alcohol counselling, Centrelink support, medical supports. And the reason I raise this, councillors, is because we're well aware that homeless people have very complex health lives. They have complex comorbidities within their lives. They have difficult psychosocial difficulties that they need to overcome. These will include drug and alcohol issues. They will include family and domestic violence. They will include difficult medical issues, making it hard for people to transverse all the way down. Today, while I was sitting outside my house, I thought, oh my God, if I'm homeless, do I have to walk 2 kilometres down to the shop just to get a pint of milk or a loaf of bread? It was impossible. And then if they don't have a vehicle, they have to cross a 4-lane highway to even cross the road to get to a bus stop. It is unacceptable. The last point I want to make is really around the victimisation. Again, you need to refer to this report. One of the unintended consequences of housing homeless people has been that there has been an increase in victimisation for people. So this report is based on WA police data. So what they saw in the first year of housing was a 70% increase in victimisation, and that was in family and domestic violence.
You have 1 minute left, thank you.
And offences against property. And the reason for that is that people found out where they were. If you work within homeless communities, as I have, it is a vast network. They find out things very easily. What you will have are people coming into this environment, and people will end up being victimised. I just want to end with this. The My Home proposal, I believe, is contrary to the Housing First evidence-based model, which has a proven track record. Homelessness, or homeless people, have a fundamental right to choose where they live and an opportunity to become a member of the community, not forced into a back block where services and forced into high-density, low socioeconomic housing arrangement. Isolation and aggregation will make their lives less, not more secure. The plan will lead to increased victimisation and criminal activities. The police, the City of Swan, will be left to manage it, as will the local residents.
Thank you, Ms Lacey. That's your 5 minutes. Councillors, questions of either the Representative Woodbridge? I'll ask you to keep the item. Thank you. Councillor Johnson, you were first.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Yeah, my question is just to confirm of Ms Lee Symington that you're asking us to support option 2, which is to completely refuse it without any caveats or suggestions to the state government. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. It's the wrong location. I know they can overcome planning issues, but it's more than just planning issues. It's zoned Parks and Rec. They already have 2 pilots up. Why ruin a piece of Parks and Rec? We live there. We know the possums, the bandicoots. We've got snakes in our garden. Once you put in services, they're going to have to dig up for 17 houses, water,
Okay, so the
sewerage.
question was, are you in favour of outright refusal?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Richards, you got a question?
Thank you for the question for Sylvia. Sylvia, from a nursing perspective, and possibly these homeless people could be patients of mine
Yes.
close by at the hospital. Everything that's been discussed is on point in terms of looking at security, self-esteem,
Yes.
all of those issues. When we gather 17 women over 55, my question is, what sort of, can you elaborate on the social and self-esteem aspects of grouping 17 women in a particular age group together?
Can I tell you that that's a very, very old model of operating homeless services? We have moved away from that. We know that it's not a successful model. It hasn't been. We've seen that replicated time and time again when you saw Homes West, pull apart their housing model. Even the Department of Communities at the moment have a 1 in 10 policy. What happens when you group homeless people together is that the other homeless people come into that cohort, because that's who their social networks are. That's where their supports are found. What you may have at times is you may have, 15 or even 10 residents who will be good residents. All it takes is 2, 1 or 2 people. 1 or 2 people, and the moment that occurs, the moment that happens, that somebody who's escaping domestic violence is seeing the violence over there, is hearing the smash up, they want to leave. So everyone who may be an appropriate resident of that facility will leave. There is no guarantee at all that this will remain at 55 for older women. There's no guarantee of that. And older women have also said they don't want to be put in a corner. They want to choose where they want to live.
Thank you, Ms Lee. Can you shorten your answer up a little bit, please, because we have a lot to get through tonight. And this,
Yep.
your question here really isn't related to a planning issue, and that's what we're dealing with. So if you could wrap up your question, thank you.
It doesn't work. We know it doesn't work.
Thank you. Our next speaker is, we have a written deputation, councillors provided from Lynn Daring. So our next speaker is Michelle Blackley.
No, Paula.
Oh,
B.
sorry. Go there. Paula Elliott, who is a neighbouring resident speaking against the proposal. You have also provided a written one, and you are going to speak, and you have 5 minutes too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and sorry for the confusion with who was speaking today.
That was my fault.
I'm actually the resident at number 37. I own that property. I've lived there for 18 years. I'm directly affected by the proposal. I've lived in this area for 18 years. I moved here to the City of Swan, and particularly this area, because I'm a country girl. And this is like being in the country. I live next door to an area that was zoned Parks and Rec. I might have got that wrong, but the naming. But because I wanted to be in that environment. My experience that I come to today is that I work in the disability sector. I've been in the disability sector for nearly 30 years. I worked for almost 20 years in the government sector, and now I work in the not-for-profit, managing a disability support organisation. When I received the letter about this application, I had spent the day in hospital with 3 people who have social admissions because there is no appropriate accommodation for them. And so receiving this application, I was extremely conflicted, and I remain conflicted about it. My conflict comes from knowing that we do not have enough services for homeless people in our community and knowing that we need to do something about it. But knowing from my own experience that congregated housing of marginalised people does not work. It's not worked over many, many years. WA has been a leader for many, many years around social reform for people living in the community. We've had examples for people with disability like Purton that was built. We've put people in places like Brownlee Towers, and we built Midvale. All of those areas, we put people together, low income, marginalised people, thinking we were doing the right thing. Where our problem is that congregated living doesn't work. Where there is no support for people on site, things fall apart. We have social issues, we have violence, we have people escaping from domestic and family violence. The site that we're looking at for people, and we've been told that there will be people escaping domestic and family violence. We want to be supporting those people. However, we're on the railway line. You just look over the fence. You can see that there are 17 units for people who are escaping domestic violence. We build shelters for people in that situation in private locations, and we don't share their addresses to keep them safe. We know that once the addresses get out for those places, people have to move because the violence from the perpetrators follows it. Who is going to pick that up? There's no support services on site for people. It's going to be the council who are going to be responding to these social issues and going to have to address these issues. I do believe that the My Homes plan is based on good intentions. However, it is the wrong location and it is going to have bad outcomes. The government policy is the 1 in 9 or 10 homes, and that's because we've worked out over many years of experience that congregated housing does not work. There are 2 reports in WA addressing homelessness and social housing. The first one is the All Paths Lead to Home, which talks about the safe and secure housing for homeless people. Secure is not temporary accommodation, as this accommodation has been said. We've been told this will be for 15 years. Women at 55 do not want to live in a 1-bedroom unit with their grandchildren can't visit them and know that they're going to have to leave after 15 years. That is not good. Sorry?
Yeah, 1 minute.
Gosh. This is a very old-fashioned model and it's proved not to work. The Affordable Housing Plan, again, identifies that the 1 in 10, if we have the 17 units in this area, we will have 36% social housing in that area. That is a recipe for disaster. That's no slant against the people who are going to be living there. We just know that this type of social housing isn't going to work. I guess WA is a leader in this space, and it has been for many, many years. I honestly believe that if this was backed by state government, this wouldn't have got this far because it is not best practice. We are taking steps back 30 years and putting people at risk.
Thank you, Ms Elliott.
Unnecessary risk.
That's your 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Councillor, you've got a couple of questions for Ms Elliott? No? Thank you. The next speaker on this is Michelle Blackley from My Homes Australia Limited, speaking in support of the proposal. She has provided a written deputation and obviously is now speaking to us. And you have 5 minutes, Ms Blackley. Thank you.
Thank you. So I am the Chair and Director of My Homes Australasia Limited. I'm also an architect, so I know a thing or two about lodging planning applications. I haven't got time to do a rebuttal on some of the misinformation you have just heard. I just want to make the point that in the planner's own report, the site is described as a grassed paddock. It is surrounded by native bushland, we agree, but where we are building the houses is a grassed paddock. The second thing is that these houses, firstly, does have the support of the Department of Communities and the Minister for Communities, Simone McGurk, and also the property or the site is managed and the tenants are managed by a community housing provider. We have had community housing providers inputting into this model of housing. It is based on housing first. Some of the examples that were given before are sizes of communities which are much, much bigger than this. Our occupants will be women over 55. They are low to medium needs. And I think the unfortunate thing is that you've just been painted a picture of a stereotypical homeless person, and homeless people are no different to everyone else in the community. Some have low medical and mental health issue needs. Others have very extreme needs. We are only dealing with the low end of that cohort. There are other facilities to deal with the high needs people. So what we're doing with this deputation is we're requesting that you overturn the planner's recommendation not to support the proposed housing development. The planner has given 4 reasons for not supporting the application. The first one is that the land should be first appropriately zoned urban under the Metropolitan Regional Scheme. We don't see the value in this suggestion. The current zoning as regional reservation for parks and gardens is not redundant because the land can continue to be used as parks and recreation into the future when the lease of the land lease for the My Home dwellings expires. Any rezoning of the land would unnecessarily delay the project, leaving homeless people without a home for at least 18 months. The second item is that all 17 proposed dwellings must be capable of achieving a bushfire attack level rating of at least BEL 29. We have had confirmation that the BEL 29 rating can be achieved for all dwellings. The BEL report will be included in the building permit application, as is common process. Any reductions of the number of dwellings or redesign of the site should be held until a certified BEL report is available. This, if necessary, can be a condition of the planning approval. The planner's other 2 recommendations acknowledge that the development is not required to be compliant with any of the city's planning policy. However, it nonetheless asks that all 17 proposed dwellings be provided with windows that have vertical emphasis consistent with the City of Swan Woodbridge Conservation Precinct's policy. We have no issue with this request. The dimensions of the windows can be revised to be compliant with the planning policy, even though we don't have to, and it can be a condition of approval. The other request is that the car parking area to be relocated behind the dwelling units consistent with the City of Swan Woodbridge Conservation Precinct's policy. The car park arrangement is actually consistent with the Woodbridge Conservation Precinct's planning policy. The relevant planning policy states that it has no control over the paving or paths or driveways of a site. There will only be car bays on this site. That is, there will be no carport or garaging structures. So effectively, it will just be open land. Although we are not required to be compliant with the city's planning policies, we have endeavoured to be sympathetic and considerate of them. The planner's recommendation report describes how we have achieved acceptable outcomes. You should be aware that the site was capable of accommodating over 30 dwellings. However, when I met with the ratepayers at the site and understood their concerns, we reduced the number of dwellings to 17. Also note that all the authority stakeholders, except the city, support the proposed development. I'm sure that you're all aware of the noticeable increase in homeless people in your area. Numbers are likely to increase as a consequence of the impact of COVID on the state's economy.
Thank you, Ms. Blakely. That is your 5 minutes. Thank you.
Right.
So we'll take some questions. Councillor Kiley, firstly. Happy to move an extra minute, councillors? Yep. Okay. Carry on for another minute, Ms. Blakely.
Right.
Thank you.
The reality is that there is a critical shortage of housing in the lower end of the rental market. There are just no homes available. So essentially, we must provide more permanent housing if we are to succeed in reducing the numbers of homeless people. It's as basic as that. There are no homes. The Devon Street development is a step in that direction. It's 17 homeless women over 55 years of age who will no longer be homeless, but they will be if you support the planner's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Questions? Councillor Richardson.
Just a question. Thank you very, very much for that presentation. Now, just a quick question about the access of the car parks. You were saying that they've now moved the design for the car parks to, was it behind?
No, we can't move it behind because it's the land drops down very quickly to the Helena River belt, and it's just not possible without removing trees. And we've put it down the side of the Palmelia gas line, which is acceptable because there is no structures. There's no carports or garage structures.
So I'm just wondering what the distance is between, say, car park 2 in relation to the last unit in the back row on the bottom end. What is the distance between the car park?
The dwelling, the actual
dwelling, the last one on the corner, in the rear.
Straight down or diagonally?
The first car park, number 2, in relation to the last unit in the bottom triangle, what would the distance be between there and that unit?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd say it'd have to be 40 metres, 50 metres. Is it 100? I don't know. I didn't look. Yeah. Why? I'm sorry. I don't understand the relevance.
I was just wondering what the distance was for that person to be able to walk to their car park. We've got
but number 2 car park wouldn't park up the top. They'd be more likely to park down closest to their dwelling.
It's the furthest point.
I'm not quite sure what you're getting at. Sorry.
Well, I'm just saying it's the furthest distance. So all the car parks are stacked and racked in one particular predominant area. So they're visually seen from anyone going past that there's a row of car parks, and they're unprotected. Like we said, there's no security, no carport, no screening. That's all.
There's trees, lots of trees. Like the southern end is
no. Where the car parks are, there are no trees.
Yeah, but there's the Palmelia gas pipeline.
No, I'm just saying that there's no security, and you've got a row of car parks just sitting there with no security. That's all. So I was just wondering.
To be honest, that's no different to someone parking their car in their driveway.
As visually, I was looking at it from the aspect from the neighbour as well next to it, that their property then looks into a car park, basically, of 17 cars lined up with nothing breaking up that structure. They're just empty car parks with cars in them. So visually, what you see from the main road and from that neighbour's yard is just car park.
Well, I don't know whether from the main road you'll see it because it's running at an angle. You'll see some of them, but you'll be looking over the back fence.
Can we have some order, please? Ms Blackley has the floor, and you were given the opportunity to speak uninterrupted. So, any further questions, councillors? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, just a question. When the 15-year lease is up, what happens then?
Well, we either have an option to renew if the government still doesn't want to use that land for whatever it desires, but we also have an agreement with WAPC that when the leases expire, they will have other land available for us to demount those houses and move them on or build new ones. So it is, for the residents, it is permanent accommodation. So once they're in, the community housing provider will then provide another house at the end of the 15 years.
So it could continue for more than 15 years then?
We don't know. I mean, 15 years is a long way away.
Okay. Next question is, you mentioned you've got 2 other developments. Is that right? One in Fremantle and the other one in Victoria Park. So what's the status of those in terms of their planning?
Well, I'd just like to say they're not pilots. They are happening. The one in North Fremantle is 18 houses. That one we will beginning at the end. We're beginning construction at the end of January. The Victoria Park one on the corner of Berwick Street and Kent Street will follow, and then this will be the third one.
Victoria Park one, is that approved by the council?
Almost. We're in meeting with them at the moment.
So it's not been approved by council. It's still at the pre-approval stage.
Well, it's how should I put it? The planning department has recommended that site be developed. We're now talking to. I've got a meeting next week with the councillors to just go through it, similar to what we're doing now. Yeah.
So in fact, we've got 2 other schemes going ahead.
Yep.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you, Ms Blackley. Now we move to item 4.2, which is the Midland Meals project and the placement of sea container structure for storage and serving of meals at lot 13, number 56 Morrison Road. Councillors, you received written deputations from Mr Brett Eccles and Ms Jan Eccles, who are business owners in the area. And the first speaker on this, when we're ready.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yes. Thank you, everyone.
The first speaker on this item is Mr Barry Brandis, speaking in support of the recommendation. Can you guys take a seat? Okay, Mr Brandis. Still outside? Okay, Mr Brandis, you're our first speaker. If you would like to come to the microphone, thank you.
Is that on?
Thank you, Mr Brandis. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Is it on?
Yep.
Yeah, well, I'm only here to speak up for Midland Meals. You know, by about they can't have the container and that there, because they do a mighty job, eh? Without Lauren and them, I was in a lot of trouble once, with no meals or nothing. And I met Midlass through Lauren when my wife died. They helped me out that much. It was unreal, and Lauren's always helped me out. And they've been fantastic. And the homeless people and the meals are fantastic.
No, Councillor Catalano's recorded.
You know?
I've got an interest. Sorry, Mr Brandis, carry on.
So, you know, you couldn't ask for anything better from Midland, you know, as far as I'm concerned. And you have a look, where's Tui Park gone? Why can't they use that part on the corner there or something? They're not allowed to be down there. You know, I think they deserve it. The old Tui Park area part there, you know, wouldn't be a bad location if they can't go down there. Because it's right behind the police station. Any trouble there, the cops are straight there straight away, you know. So I don't think you could ask for anything better for them, especially for the homeless, because I had a lot of strife with my young blokes through drugs and booze and everything. And without them, we wouldn't have had a feed, me and my missus. I'm being honest, you know. That's about all I've got to say about it.
Thank you, Mr Brandis. Well done. Any
Thank
questions,
you.
councillors? Councillor Richardson.
Oh, just got a quick question for you. Oh, where's he gone? Thank you. Oops. Has he come back? Just come back for. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. I can imagine it was more than difficult, and you know, to be able to come and speak about your experiences would be quite hard. How long ago did you start to use the meal service?
When they first started on the corner over here.
How long ago was that for you?
About 8 months ago.
8
10
months ago. Yeah.
Roughly.
Yeah. And
Might be a bit longer, actually.
Yeah, no, we know that it's a really important service. Would it have made you feel better if there was a permanent place to go where you could actually sit inside and have a meal without having to be outside in the car park, or, you know, where you'd feel more comfortable?
Where would you put them?
I'm just saying, if there was a building available, would it be?
Oh yeah, it would
feel
be for
much
everybody.
more,
Yeah.
much more, you know,
Yeah, more comfortable and everything. You know,
respectable,
being
and feel
honest
like
with
you weren't out in the car park.
No.
Maybe, if that was possible in the
Yeah.
future. Yeah, more
Be a good
secure
idea.
and yeah.
Being honest with you.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know, because you know, if that was possible and we could find somewhere, it would be nice to set up that environment for you,
Yeah, that is
rather
true.
than be outside in, you know, the environment in the car park. So yeah, thank you very much.
That's no worries. Thank
Tana.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Brandis. Next speaker on this is Mr. Lauren Pratt from Midland Mills, speaking in support of the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Pratt. You've got 5 minutes as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for letting me speak to this item. My name is Lauren Pratt. I'm the senior pastor of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Janebrook. I've run a similar service in Tullamarine, Melbourne for 18 years, transferred to Perth in 2019, been operating in Midland Mills with Mitch Kellerman for just over 12 months. Why? Why do we do this every night? Why? Or rather, you know, I could be home. Well, I've experienced what it's like to be on the street myself, personally. Scared, lonely, and frightened as to what to do next, with what I appeared to think was nowhere to go. Both Mitch and I want to make a difference in the lives of others and see stories just like Barry happen in the lives of people who are on the street through no fault of their own. We are seeing an increase in families and older women, teenagers and men who are facing food insecurity. Added to this, many are facing homelessness in our city. We feed 7 nights a week, rain, hail or shine. 365 days a year. We average between 70 on a wet night and 120 people on a clear night. The demographic is mostly Caucasian people, with some Indigenous, mostly men. Some are stuck on 457 visas, unable to get out of their situation and in great need. We feed families with children living in cars scattered throughout Midland. Volunteers, we have all volunteers, no paid staff. We have 95 volunteers working in Midland. We have 31 volunteers working in Ellenbrook. Many are elderly, and the reason we need a sea container is to make the job of the volunteers a lot more manageable. It's a heavy load, carting things down from the church in a trailer, down to the site each night, setting up tables, setting up barbecues, and then packing them up again. And it'd be great for me to have a bit of relief as the leader to be able to allow them to put it back in the sea container overnight. It'd make my load a lot lighter. It'll also alleviate extra time it takes to set up, pack up and tow it, and also towing. It's very hard these days to find people who actually tow a trailer, and most cars aren't built for that. No food preparation will be done on site. It's all done back at the church and brought down. No washing up will be done at the site as well. It's done back at the church site. The container will only be used between 5:30 p.m. and 8 p.m. nightly. The container will be well secured, well lit, and in conjunction with the council youth services, they will help us paint it so that it looks professional and very tasteful. The awning is only up on inclement weather. partnerships. As a majority of services are required to service these vulnerable people and they only operate during business hours, we are there after hours as a link, and we link back to people that the services in Midland that we've formed partnerships with. We're trying to create a net so that people like Barry and don't fall through the net, and we can catch them. And we have wonderful services here in Midland that we can link them with. And we are currently developing further relationships with other services. As Barry mentioned, we have a relationship with Midlas, and we work together there. We also have relationships with Swan City Youth, contacts in Indigo Junction, the Education Department, and the City of Swan. It's one of the questions people ask me often is, why feed the homeless? They are only going to have more money if you feed them to spend on drugs and alcohol. When you think of it, you and I, we have at least 30 privileges a day and more. Even having our own coffee mug to drink from is a privilege that we take for granted. These people only have alcohol and drugs to turn to as their only vice. It's all they know. And so we owe it to them that we who are privileged, we who have stability, to sit with them, talk with them, win their trust, and then network them to communities, help organisations that can see beyond the drugs, the alcohol, and see the need and provide mentorship, provide holistic programs, provide stepping up where they can find the reality of life that we all take for granted. So I reach out to you to come with me on a journey to make a difference in the lives of the homeless people that we have in our lifetime, in our time, on our watch.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. Councillors, questions? Councillor Kiley.
Thank you.
Now, I'm 70% deaf.
Okay.
So I may battle a bit. If I miss
up.
it, please try again, but yeah.
I've got the speaker on, Lauren, so can you hear me okay now?
I can hear you, yeah.
I just want to ask about your setup in Tullamarine, but first I just want to say thank you for taking this on and giving so much to the community, not only within Midland, but obviously what you've undertaken in Tullamarine in the past. So congratulations to you and your helpers there. But I just want to ask about the Tullamarine setup. That's not in a built-up area of Melbourne. What was the arrangement there? Did you have a shipping container as well?
It was completely different. I had a 1,500 square metre building, and it was more of a food pantry operation, reaching out into Broadmeadows, Sunshine and Melton, which are some of the lowest class suburbs in Australia, let alone the state.
And how would they access the food there? Would they drive there or live locally?
Both, even coming by taxi at times. That's how important the food was to them. There are more families and senior people.
If I could be play devil's advocate on this, you mentioned about creating a net to capture these people. The critics would say that you're actually creating a honeypot where we attract potentially undesirables into Midland and further creating a problem. What do you say about that?
I think that the statistics speak for itself. For us, we have only been going for a year, and already I can name to you 3 families who now have a house, the husband has a job, and I just heard of the very first person who came to us he was the very first person we fed a burger to, and he too has received a job and a house as well. And so I'm not interested in creating a social gathering centre, a bees and a honey pot for my gratification or for our gratification. I'm interested in seeing these people plugged back into society, which they deserve to have, and I think that that's what we need to be about, is releasing them back and walking them back to where we know and take for granted.
Just one last question through you, Mayor. Is there any way that you could see where you mentioned previously that a lot of people drive to the facility that you're currently operating. Is there any way of doing takeaway in that respect and encouraging people to leave the area or go back to wherever they're staying rather than congregating within Midland?
There's no congregating down there. I'd say the most that the people would stay would be 10, 15 minutes. And that's mainly me having a chance to go up and say good day to them, ascertain who they are and what their situation is and where I can plug them into our fellow organisations that can help. And so, no, it's not a gathering place and there's no intention. And that's why we're out on the street in the car park, because there's people that would come to us that normally would not come to us. They have got mental issues and they would not go into a building. And so we are there that we can provide a place where they come in and can take away and just disappear back into the shadows and struggle.
Councillor Johnson, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Lauren, look, thank you for the good work you do. I think we all
I'm struggling to hear.
Yeah, got a very low voice, I'm afraid. Thank you for all the good work you do, and we acknowledge the service you're providing. A question relating to the permanency of it. Is this going to be a permanent feature in Midland, this shipping container?
Can someone relate that to... I'm struggling.
Maybe someone with a higher voice could do it. Maybe Tanya.
Councillor Johnson's asking, Lauren, if this is going to be a permanent fixture.
As long as it takes. Now, as you can see, the whole thing is portable. It can be taken away overnight if need be. And so we are just there as the situation is there. And who knows? There may be other needs come where we can provide better services. But we need to be adaptable, and that's why we are looking for the sea container. And we need to be able to be there to reach the need as it arises, as it comes there. And Councillor, if I remember, you were one of the first people that came and shook my hand when we started opening up there. So thank you for your help and support.
Thank you. Look, thanks for acknowledging that. I have been down to visit you. A question about the difference between a shipping container and having a building. One of the questions I have is about hygiene, and you've said washing up will be done elsewhere, but what about people washing their hands and things like that before eating?
If you come down to our site, you'll see we have a table specifically for washing the hands. There's running water there, there's a tap. We have the 20-litre container there. We also have the soaps, we have all the detergents, and we have the hand sanitizer as well. We really pride ourselves in trying to make the place a clean place, because you just don't know where they've been. And we ask everyone that comes through, as they line up to come through, we've got a barrier similar to this, and they come through the barrier, we ask them to wash their hands first.
Okay, that's good. And do you think this is... Some people have said that this is damaging Midland by attracting homeless people. What do you say to that?
Some people have said this is damaging...
Damaging Midland through attracting homeless people into the area. What's your response to that?
In my real job, during the day, I'm a church pastor. I get to do many funerals. I get to hear many eulogies. I don't hear many eulogies about the house the person built. I don't hear many about the car they drove. I hear what their character's like. I hear if they were a loving person. I hear what the difference they made in the people's lives, whether it's their family or their workmates or their loved ones. I guess this is our opportunity here to make a difference in people's lives. They won't remember the sea container. They won't remember even the food we give them, but they remember that we cared. They remember that we touched them. They remember that we were there when they needed us.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're saying that this makes Midland better because we're caring for people.
Yep.
Okay, I understand. No, look, that's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Richardson.
Thanks very, very much, Lauren, for your lovely work and for the volunteers that have helped you. I'm just curious, I'm trying to establish from a nursing perspective, with the welfare would be similar people that we both deal with, whether you would more so like a permanent place And what sort of set-up times does it take for your volunteers prior to the 5:30 start, and then how long does it take them after to pack the tables and chairs and the equipment away?
We start at 3:30 in the afternoon back at the Swan Valley Adventist Church. We are in the car, packed up and driving out the driveway at 5:15, and we arrive down here at the site hopefully 22:30. So that's the timeline that it's taking us. Washing up, most often that comes back to me, but I've been encouraging other teams to come in, or other people to come in and take place of that. They are totally exhausted after 2 hours of just serving people, because they're having people come past, they're making sure they've got enough cups, enough things in place, and that is one of the busiest volunteer jobs that I know when it's full on running. And so we've got a team of 2 or 3, and it takes us 20 minutes to do the washing up at the end of the night.
After you go back at 8 o'clock?
Yeah,
so
we go back, wash up.
But you drive back there, so we've another 15 minutes to drive
That's
back.
right.
Then you start doing the washing up. We're looking at 9 o'clock by the time
I'm using
that's,
the car by about 9:10. I just watch my car clock, and I'm using the car 9:10.
What I'm trying to establish is, I understand the sea container, and I know it's a quick fix. But in some communities, we have like share a meal in local churches and halls weekly, daily. And I'm just wondering, I'm not saying it's there or possible, is it more likely that a facility or a room where you don't have to go take the dishes away, where you can have that set up, would be far more feasible for what you're doing?
That could be an option. But I do feel safe out there in the open. In that car park there, it's ideal. You can see people coming and going. You can see all around. And we also have the police behind us, although we never had to use them. And so I feel safe there myself. And then the other thing is, I want to be there for those who are really struggle. They won't get into a room.
I see.
And I've got 5 or 6 of those, at least I can name you now, that walk our streets in the daytime. They're mentally struggling. And I find that if you feed them, you can get more further with them. And so I'm there for them as well. And so I guess that's why I like being out there. I also like the pop-up thing of it. It means we haven't got people congregating around. Like a building, they might come and stand there earlier in the day and wait for hours, etc., whatever, or come back seeking more services. Here, we're there, we feed them, we're gone, services gone. If you need to contact me, grab me by the mobile, but we're totally out of that place.
And I understand the need for the access for those who don't want to come into the building, where you maybe have like a side, some sort of other area for them. I'm more concerned about the time for you and your volunteers, because it becomes quite tiring, as you said, for those elderly volunteers, and trying to make it easier to help you and your team.
We do use 3 or 4 back there at the base. And then by the time we come down here, there's a team of up to, on Saturday night and Sunday night, which are our biggest nights, there's 12 to 14 people helping either unpack the trailer, serve, etc., the meals.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Coley.
Lauren, just a last question, if I could. Do you think this model would work if we rotated that sea container around within the city of Swan to different suburbs? Because I just highlight the fact that Indigo Junction, I believe it did a study on homelessness in the city of Swan, and it showed that it's not a problem particular only to Midland. There's people living in cars all over the city of Swan. Would this model work if we put this show on the road, so to speak?
I think there is a great future for this type of model. Show on the road, yes, but you have to advertise and promote that. But why can't we multiply that out there and use other services and other organisations in our community and say, hey, come and join the net, where we want to make a difference and make sure that no one goes home hungry, lonely or uncared for overnight. And so we could use other clubs, other organisations who would like to serve, I think. So I think there's a great future in showing that we as a City of Swan, we care.
Thank you, Lauren. Greatly appreciate that. Councillors, you would also receive written deputation in support of this proposal submitted by Ms Kim Grubb, Ms Caroline Van Wees, Mr Gavin Eva, Ms Gearson Robles, Norma Borgia, Ms Rosanna Borga, Ms Esther Pramatsarari, Ms Christine Stratford, Ms Rebecca Barber, Ms Sarah Newton, Ms Christine Sugriato, Ms Colleen Mills, Ms Marianne Coombe, Marla Eva and Sherilyn Mullman. So before we go to the next item, can someone recall Councillor Catalano? Okay, the next item on the agenda, councillors, is item 4.3. Thank you, councillors. It's 4.3, the site remediation at lot 134, number 133 Clayton Street. First speaker on this item is Mr Mark Richards, the chairperson of Bellevue Resident Ratepayers Association. And Mr Richards, you've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. As previously stated, the Bellevue Residents and Ratepayers Association, BRA, is not against remediating this site. However, we have strong concerns about the health risks to our community as a result of the remediation. We are aware DEWA has advises an appropriate environmental management plan should be prepared to address the risks associated with the potential exposure and disturbance of soil contamination. Taking into account this advice from DEWA, we request that Council defer this decision until such time a remediation risk management plan and an appropriate environmental management plan have been presented for community comment. Given the known wind conditions in Bellevue, we ask the timing of the remediation be taken into account so as to coincide with the wetter months. BRA is concerned about the future use of this site as its current use is in conflict with the Bellevue East Land Use Study, BELLUS, as adopted by Council in 2013. The land is supposed to have been rezoned to residential, and at this time, this has not occurred. According to BELLUS, this land is supposed to be used for residential development rather than any form of industrial activity in such proximity to houses and a primary school. The delay in enacting the BELLUS has already seen a storage facility approved on the land determined to become residential and a lunch bar approved on land already zoned residential. Further research is required to identify any other instances that have taken place post-Council adopting the BELLUS, instances where developments have been approved contradictory to BELLUS. In summary, BRA requests approval is deferred until a remediation risk management plan and appropriate environmental management plan have been subjected to a community comment period to evaluate the impact of the remediation on the local community. 2, the City of Swan Council expedites the BELLUS to ensure no further inappropriate developments occur. And 3, review developments that have taken place since the Council adopted BELLUS in 2013 to determine how many and the nature of the inappropriate developments. Thank you.
Questions of Mr Richards? Councillor Catalano?
Back in
there was a memory lapse.
Where we were before. Yes, how many developments do you think have taken place since 2013, contrary to BELLUS?
The Darling Range was a big one that probably could have been avoided. With the service station, had a neighbourhood centre been approved earlier on. As I said, we've got oil coming back to right to the Omex site because it wasn't rezoned. We've got a lunch bar in a residential area that was zoned residential. I'm not sure. I'd have to get back to you on that.
It's okay, I can ask staff, but I just thought you might have some ideas. But you've probably talked about 4 or 5 there that you know of. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mr Richards. Next speaker on this item is Mr Arthur Storm, who's a neighbouring property against the recommendation. Thank you, Mr Storm. You also have 5 minutes.
I'll just set my clock.
That's right, I'll do it for you. I've got one here.
No, I've got it here. Good evening, Mr Mayor, councillors and the City of Swan staff. This is how I started at the last meeting I spoke to you, and I will repeat what I said then. My name is Arthur Storm and I live at 2 May Street, Bellevue. My issue of concern is the ongoing problems created by the City of Swan Planning Department presenting unsuitable industrial development proposals to the Council for consideration. More specifically, where the proposal is inappropriate due to the location of the proposed development being located in predominantly residential precinct. Which brings me to the item now 4.3, it was 4.6 then, on the agenda, well it's not on the agenda this evening, but at this agenda meeting, the Civil Works Site Remediation DA 139/20, this DA 139/20 does not highlight the fact that, if approved, it will allow for an industrial activity and enterprise for the screening of possibly more than 50,000 tonnes of known and unknown landfill that contains materials dumped illegally on the site. The site was classified by the Department of Environment and Conservation on the 2nd of April 2009 as possibly contaminated. Investigation required. This development will have environmental impacts that affects the wider residential community of Bellevue, and yet the planners are only concerned to contact the immediate neighbours to the site. There is a nature trail, including a playground that abuts the boundary, and a school and a sports oval in close proximity. The development activities are not only a concern on the site, but will also impact residents throughout the community. The proposed application is light on detail, and it appears that the city planners have not informed the relevant state environmental authorities as to the nature and to the scale of the proposed activities to be conducted on the site. It is possible that the location and the volume of material to be processed will require environmental investigation, if not licensing of the operation, as at other locations in the City of Swan where screening is done. Please do not approve without further the development application without further environmental investigation and approved guidelines being provided by the appropriate environmental authorities. In saying that, the approval they've got, they don't have an approval from the environmental, they just have a classification. And I've been trying to contact the licensing department regarding this because they want to put an industrial operation on that site, which is the screening of the rubbish. This might not work, but anyway, while the planning department appears to want to limit the conditions due to the remediation process, not having any future use established, and that's another thing that's occurred, it would still be preferable that a site characterisation be undertaken prior to any decision on approving the screening and remediation. This type of screening operation is registered and licensed this type of screening operation, if registered and licensed, would see a buffer applied, or at least there is guidance on buffer requirements for a screening process. The planning department has not considered that there should be a buffer applied to the screening of the waste, as all the materials processed can be carried in the air beyond the boundary. I have contacted DEWA myself, and they are still to get back to me, but they said they would get back to me, as they are looking into the possibility that a licence may be required for the operation of the screening of the waste on the site. We're talking 50,000 tonnes. It's a massive operation. I'd just like to say we all have neighbours, you know. No one in this chamber would accept the development application if it was proposed by their neighbour, which is what is occurring at my place. Even John Hughes would not be happy to approve the activity if it was to be undertaken on his neighbour's property. Before you consider approving the remediation of this site, I would be more comfortable, and that's a word they used in that, they're comfortable, they said. I would be more comfortable if there was more information and transparency on how the process is to be undertaken. I just checked my clock.
3 seconds. There you go.
How long have I got?
Well, now you've got 5 minutes. There you go.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, so the
Thank you, Mr.
terms
Storm.
are remediation and site characterisation. There needs to be more investigation into this process before
okay,
you
you
approve
did have
it.
your 5 minutes, Mr. Storm, so don't go anywhere. There might be questions. Any questions, councillors, of Mr. Storm? Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, hi, Arthur. Yeah, I think what you're saying is you'd like to see the environmental management plan before this is approved.
I'd like to see more transparency, and I think, you know, while the new changes on the new proposal have been added, they still say it's sort of the City of Swan that will decide if the environmental plan is a suitable plan. You know, they're the delegated authority in this area, but they should bring in DEWA. They shouldn't be making a decision regarding how the remediation process should occur on that site.
Yeah. And you and I have spoken about what regulations or licence might be needed to screen 50,000 tonnes of material in this location. Can you give us more information about that might help our officers understand if something has perhaps somehow inadvertently been omitted
No worries.
from this process?
I was trying to get there. I mean, there are fact sheets all over the DEWA site. There are guidelines. There is separation. They talk about separation of these activities. All these things are outlined in guidance for the assessment of environmental factors, separation distances between industrial and sensitive land uses. There's a playground that the City of Swan have put there, which is within 40 metres of the boundary of that property. What are you going to do? Put signs up to say they can't use it anymore? You know, it's just, they're here. You only have to go to the West Australian Government environmental sites and you can get the information.
Any further questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr. Storm.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
I appreciate it.
Okay, the next item, council, is 4.7, the proposed hop farm and brewery at lot 301, number 590, Great Northern Highway, Herne Hill. Council, there was a written deputation from Shelley Wilson, who's a local resident, identifying concerns with the proposal. And the speaker on this item is Mr. Carlo Famiano, the applicant, speaking in support. Thank you, Mr. Famiano. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors, staff and the Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm speaking on behalf of the landowners, and they have conveyed their support for the recommendation for approval from the planning staff. And we've gone through the conditions and certainly don't see an issue with the conditions that have been imposed on this application or proposed to be imposed. Just giving you a bit of background, this application has commenced some time ago, nearly 2 years ago, with the landowner planting samples of hops on this property to get the model right, to make sure that we can get hops to grow, make sure that we've got the right hop that grow. Since then, we've gone through a very vigorous process with the city's planning department, which has resulted in a number of changes that had to have been done to address concerns raised by the planning staff, concerns raised by any government departments, and certainly comments received during the public advertising period. So we have addressed those issues, and we have gone to great lengths to try and address all the concerns raised. Part of the application also included the preparation of a number of reports to try and address all those issues, including acoustics reports, traffic reports, environmental reports. So we've done a fair bit of work on getting this application to where it is today. The land itself doesn't have any rural activity on it at the moment. The landowner lives at the back of the property, and he's the one that's proposing the venture on this lot. So he'll continue to reside on the property and also do the farming and operate the business. The land itself is obviously in the Swan Valley. It's in the area B of the Swan Valley. And it's in an area or a stretch of road which has a number of different types of land uses, including vineyards, rural activities. There's a few commercial activities. There's a school and pub place of worship. So it's got a variety of uses within the area. This application in front of you at the moment proposes to put a rural activity on this property. and it proposes to also provide a tourist-type venue as well. We believe that the proposal put forward tonight certainly addresses the objectives of the Swan Valley. It certainly puts the rural activity in the area, which it was absent until now, and it certainly looks at providing and fostering tourism within the area. The site itself has, it's fairly vacant to the rear, and to the front it has a number of mature trees. This application proposes to retain those mature trees, and the design of the building itself and the operations on this site was aimed at trying to keep those trees, push the building away from the street, and try and keep the landscaping in the front half of the lot to try and retain the character of the land and character of the area. So we have been very mindful on not only the use, but we've been mindful on the design and try and maintain that the setting in which this development sits in is consistent with the Swan Valley. Obviously, on a planning point of view, the item had been presented to the Swan Valley Planning Committee. It was recommended for approval. There was 2 conditions or 2 suggestions or recommendations made from that committee. One was the fact that we needed to have the crop grown as part of the project, which is not an issue because the whole focus is to grow the hops. And the second one was to adjust the car parking area to push it back. The original plan, the car parking area was a little bit more forward on the lot. We've redesigned that and shifted it so that we retain more trees and we provide more landscaping, and we've actually put some of the hop vines at the front just to showcase it a little bit more. So on the planning side of it, the support from the planning staff, the City of Swan's planning staff and the Swan Valley Planning Committee, certainly it lends itself to we have met what is required in this area on a planning point of view. On one note, we did notice that in the report there was a question or a comment about the buffer widths, and there was no reference to it in the report, which there wasn't. We have gone back to the consultant to work out, to find out what the buffer widths along the northern boundary would be required, because on the northern property there is a vineyard. So we're looking at trying to prevent sprays from affecting the venture on this property. That buffer zone will be 4 metres. We have provided that information to the planning staff, and we certainly don't have an issue with putting that into detail before the building licence stage if this ever gets approved. So just to conclude, we have a project here which has gone through a fairly lengthy process. It's gone through a lot of work. It has addressed the planning framework, and we certainly are supportive of the recommendation. We hope Council sees the same way as well. Thank you.
Mr Famione. Any questions? Councillor Richardson.
Just a quick question in regard to the odour. I can't remember how bad the smell of hop spent grain is, and also when it's to be collected and how often and the amount.
Obviously, it will be collected as needed. If it's if there is, and I'm not au fait with the entire process of hop growing and producing of beer, but the waste will be removed from the site. It is a condition of the planning approval, so it will be removed once there is enough to remove it at the end of the day. But I can find that information. I can provide it before council if need be. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I can do that. I'm not a professional at this at growing hops here, so. Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, I think that report was looking more towards the issues of sprays, because that was an issue that was raised by one of the government departments, so we had to do that study to address that.
Councillor Goley.
Thank you, Mayor. How are the hops growing at the moment? You mentioned them before that they were going okay. Are they taking to the climate?
It's surprisingly, they've actually been better than what we'd expected. Richard, the landowner, has been running, like I said, the crop for some time, and he's run several samples of the hops, and he's actually quite surprised on how good it is growing, and he's actually getting good yield from the samples that he's got. So he's certainly happy. He's confident that it's all going to work.
And just on another issue, I very much like the design you've put forward here. Can I make a comment, however, that I'm probably going to raise this more and more as a councillor, the issue of very dark roofs, and I think there's a need to have reflective light-coloured roofing. I'd like to see that become more of something we raise as an issue within the City of Swan, and the need for potentially having the capacity, at least engineering-wise, to support solar panels in the future, even if you're not looking at that at the short term, maybe creating the roof as such that they could support solar panels down the track.
Oh, look, I dare to say that would be something that we'd look at, obviously, to try and use some of the solar power instead of using power off the grid. As you appreciate, at this point, we're at the beginning of the process, I guess. From here, there's so much more to do, including finances and so on. So it's certainly something that could be looked at.
Yeah, just the consideration for having extra weight on the roof from an engineering sense. That's all that I wanted to raise at the moment. Thank you.
Definitely. But in relation to the roof, are you suggesting not a colour bond, a zinc loom?
A light reflective colour rather than a dark absorbing heat colour.
No problem.
Thank you, councillors. Thanks to you, Mr. Famiano. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you for the
councillors, on 5.8, you've received a written deputation from Ms. Sarah Ratley, which is the Shady Hills Bushfire Ready Group, on the secondary access. So that brings us now to 5.9, which is State Equestrian Centre Future Management Options. And there are two speakers coming along here. Is Mr. Ron Fleming, who's the chairperson, and Mr. Dwight Pedlow of Equestrian WA, speaking against the recommendation. They have also previously provided a written deputation. And Ron, you're speaking.
I am.
By the look like it. Okay, you have 5 minutes. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess just as an opening thing, Department of Sport and Recreation and Equestrian WA and the City of Swan have been discussing this matter for considerable time, and we've actually presented in front of you previously about some of the issues. The major problem that Equestrian WA has in regard to the ongoing running of the State Equestrian Centre is that only 57% of the hirers, the users of the facility actually are members. Another 33% are other equestrian users who are non-members of Equestrian WA. They're members of other clubs. And 10% of the users are non-equestrian as well. The majority of the time, the regular users and hirers are from the area of the City of Swan, so they are local community, and a large amount of the usage is community recreational and sport activities. Additional to that, there's a large number of people that are not countable that actually use the facility to utilise trail rides, to go down onto the river and such like, and do use our showers, toilets, etc. On a regular basis. And historically, our membership has had to subsidise the running costs of the facility. So we're not saying that we don't want to remain there. We do want to remain there. What we do want is we want some City of Swan support to continue running the facility for the community aspect of it. So there's been quite a lot of discussion along those lines. To our knowledge, the government has no knowledge, or there's been no discussion about them actually taking over, as is proposal in option 1 of the paper you have in front of you. And we see that it's a three-way operation, that all three of us, as in Equestrian WA, City of Swan and the government, should be part of it. And I believe the government's quite happy to have that sort of involvement. There is considerable community use of the facility. In option 2, there's some view of moving the titles such that the one portion would maybe be run by the City of Swan, and the main building would be, and the stables such like would be still run by the government or ourselves. That, just moving a couple of lines, is very impractical in the ability for that to operate. There's no access to the part that the City of Swan would be operating without going through the main part of the State Equestrian Centre. So there's a number of serious faults in how this paper, we believe, has been put together, and we would like much more discussion around that whole thing. In regard to the infrastructure costs, that is obviously a federal, state and city type proposal to get funding for it, and if the City of Swan steps away from that, then that community side of it would then possibly miss out on being able to access some of those funds. So we believe this hasn't been thought through sufficiently with all the background that's gone on, all the consideration we've had, that there is far more to this as a community facility, as well as we accept it is a state sporting facility as well. We are the State Sporting Association, but there's a very large community part to that, and as you move through a large part of the City of Swan, there is a very, very large horse contingent, has been here for a long time and it's growing, that I believe becomes an obligation for the city to retain some involvement with us and actually pick up some of the shortfall. We're not asking you to run it, we're just asking for us to work more in a partnership than has historically been the case.
Thanks, Mr Fleming. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Ron. In regard to the other groups that utilise the facilities there, has there been any discussion with them about the proposals that are before us tonight and next week? Do you know, have they raised any concerns in regard to if there has been any concerns raised by those groups?
We have met with them and kept them very informed in the where we're heading and the discussions we've been having. To date, we haven't discussed this particular proposal because this came out of left field, so to speak, very recently. And so, but we have been meeting with them regularly and we will continue to do so.
So in regard to this, there's really been no detailed consultation with the other groups and, in fact, I guess the broader equestrian community?
No, as there hasn't been from the City of Swan with us about this proposal.
Councillor Kyle, you got a question?
Thank you, Mayor. Ron, thanks for the deputation. I'm just interested in the money that is being looked at. I'm just interested to know the use of the facility by equestrian people in other councils nearby, not just the City of Swan, for example, Kalamunda or Mundaring. Have they been approached as well as the City of Swan, or at the moment are you just looking at the City of Swan?
The land and the buildings and everything do belong to the City of Swan, so therefore, and we are a leaseholder of it. The lease expires, and originally expired on the 30th of December this year. An extension has been granted for 12 months for us to work through these issues. I would have thought if the City of Swan wanted to involve some of those other shires and such like, then that possibly would be more for the city to be discussing rather than for us to, like, if I go, I'm a ratepayer of the City of Swan, we have a facility, if I go to the Kalamunda Council and say you should be giving us some money, I suspect they're going to say, why are you here?
But is it something that you would support, your organisation would support, given that I would imagine that a lot of the equestrian people would come from areas outside the City of Swan? It's just the users of the facility are not just based within the City of Swan. So.
Oh, absolutely, they do come. There's a large number of our regular users, and our resident clubs are predominantly City of Swan, but there are others from outside. Our members, from all over the state have been subsidising the operation of the facility for 33 years. And we're at that point where that's not really sustainable in the longer term, and we have a lease to renegotiate, and such. That is what has, in reality, brought this matter to a head.
Any other questions? Councillor Galano.
Yes, thank you. It strikes me that this is actually a lot of money, and I do remember that it wasn't that long ago that, you know, the State Equestrian Centre asked for quite a substantial amount of money for putting some kind of dust suppressant on the facility.
Correct.
Yes. You know, it's obviously a very expensive facility to run. The point is, how many City of Swan residents and ratepayers are benefiting from it? And can we justify the cost to those residents and ratepayers? That's the question I have to ask myself, because there's a lot of demands on funds in the City of Swan, and that's something I have to consider. So how many people are we talking about that actually that are from the City of Swan that benefit from this facility?
I'll just defer to my colleague here for the actual membership that are based in the City of Swan is.
It's just under 500, or I think it's 400 Equestrian WA members are from the City of Swan, out of our 2,400. We estimate it's a bit difficult because we don't. It's a shared facility with other clubs. Sorry. Yeah, so we estimate there's about 400. I think it was 439 in 2019. Haven't done the stats for this year yet. Members of Equestrian WA that are resident in the City of Swan, and there's estimated about a total of 1,200 regular users of the facility through either Brigadoon Horsepower, formerly RDA, Brigadoon, the Polo Cross, Pony Club Association, Swan Valley Horse and Pony Club, etc. So those combined groups would come to around about the 1,200 estimated City of Swan residents that use the facility formally, as opposed to those that just come down from Brigadoon Estate, walk their dogs, etc., etc.
There's also a large number of people that live in other parts of the city that keep their horses out in the valley because of the facility, and consequently spend a great deal of money and put a lot of money through the city businesses because they are out here every day as well. So it's quite a difficult thing to measure, because the members that we have that live in Fremantle or live in Gosnell, or you know, other sort of residential suburbs and whatever, they obviously don't have a horse in their backyard. So the actual business that the facility brings into the City of Swan is very, very large. There's two of the biggest equine veterinary hospitals in the City of Swan. A major reason for that is because so many horses live out here and are kept out here and things like that. So the employment and that sort of add-on that the equestrian brings, which is quite unique to, like if I'm a tennis player, I've got a couple of tennis rackets and I break a tennis racket and I just get another one and I keep it in the boot of my car. When you've got horses, we have a much bigger footprint in the overall economy. So has been measured at various different things, and it is in some of the information that we provided the city before of what sort of economic benefit we bring to the actual city.
Thanks, Ron. Councillor Richardson, you're next.
And just one, so the 178,000 contribution towards operating costs is effectively for a private club. Is that correct?
No.
No. What do you mean by operating costs? I mean, that's actually to do with the facility.
That's to assist in running the facility day to day.
Okay. And
in a similar way as no doubt the city provides support to many of the other sports clubs and things around.
So you're talking about electricity or what are you actually thinking about?
Well, we haven't nutted it down to exactly
You-
the specifics, but it's the operating costs. So yes, we have power bills, we have cleaners, minor repairs, all of those sorts of things that would assist in the operation of the
All right,
facility.
fine. And one further question is, you couldn't actually ask your members to contribute more, like in terms of their subscriptions, membership fees?
Western Australian Equestrian WA members pay approximately $150 per year more than any other state of Australia for their membership. The majority of that money goes into running the State Equestrian Centre, and it still creates a shortfall. So if a similar facility such as in other states, they don't get that support. They do. Werribee, for example, gets large support from the Werribee Council to run that facility. We're the only one that doesn't get, of the major facilities, that doesn't get support. In Queensland, there's two very similar facilities that are actually run by their councils. So we're quite unique. We've managed for 33 years, almost to our detriment, I suspect, because you've had the asset in the valley for 33 years and it realistically hasn't cost very much to the council for that to occur.
Now you can have a turn, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you. Just a quick couple of questions. And Councillor Catalano actually asked me the question regarding the contribution. What is the approximate operational cost for the running of the centre?
And again, so I don't mislead, I'm going to ask Mr. Pedlow to give these out. I'm the chair, so I don't know the details.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Thank you, Councillor. The operation for the State Equestrian Centre budget is about $580,000, around $600,000 per annum. We generate the total operating budget, for the centre, is just on over $1 million. It generates about $500,000 a year from income from hire. And then there's various support. The rest of the shortfall's been supported by the membership of Equestrian WA members.
I understand the employment and the economic benefit for the City of Swan and its members, and I understand that the area is quite small for the membership base, and you do need to go outside for that. What is an annual membership approximately for?
A senior membership is 400 and it's just changed for this year. Yeah, it came down to 400 and I think it's $29 per year for 21.
Is that just an average person with a horse who?
Yeah. So that's a senior membership.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we do have various scales that go down to around the 300. Yeah.
Okay. Just quickly, in terms of operational use for the 7 day a week, at what capacity is it used, the centre? Like, are we full from 6 in the morning till 9 at night every night with clubs and events?
Yeah, it's heavily used on all weekends. So it's open all bar 4 weekends of the year, which is over the Christmas period. The facility most weekends has multiple events on at the different areas. So there'll be 3 clubs using the facility at any one time on the weekend. So it's 100% occupancy for essentially 48 weekends of the year. And then during the weekdays, the capacity it runs at about 30-40% higher capacity during the week, but it's scaled down to...
During what times would that be during the week?
The facility is open 7 days a week, and it's essentially on weekdays from 7 a.m. till 5 p.m.
With that 30-40% during the weekdays, again, where is your block of time that is it empty at any point during that, or is it sort of full?
Yeah, it varies. So there's various locations, so it's multiple areas. So at any one time there'll be someone hiring somewhere, but during the week, unless there's particular events being hired, it's open for casual hire, just individuals to come to use the facility. So
time slots after school, or empty, a lot of empty time slots?
There are some empty time slots, yes.
That could be potentially filled?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I just see there's a lack of horse riding, affordable horse riding for children and adults in the city of Swan, close by. And I wonder whether that might be an option that you might look into as well.
We've done quite a lot of modelling on that, and it's a very good point. That to come in and hire the facility to bring your horse along, it's $25 per hour to use various areas, so it's not very cost inhibitive. It's it's primarily a competition venue and then a training venue. So the training compiles that 30%, and then we hold clinics and other.
It is, and it's sort of based more around that model. But in terms of average users in City of Swan who want to go horse riding, they can't, and they can't take their children to horse riding who don't own a horse, and it's quite a lucrative spot there. That it's something potentially it could be looked at as well. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment to that? One of the problems we have with the lease is that horses cannot live there, so they can't be registered there. So we can't actually run a riding school. There's been an exemption granted to riding for disabled for the Brigadoon riding for disabled, so they keep 10 horses or so in some paddocks that we've got fenced off, but the lease does not actually allow us to have horses living there to run something, because it would be wonderful to be able to run a riding school type thing, horse hire out of it, but the current structure doesn't permit that.
Councillor Coley.
Oh, just a quick question, Mr Mayor. How would that exemption be changed in terms of that lease agreement?
Have you negotiated with the lease?
Yeah, well, we're heading into a new lease, so it could be an option to explore. Obviously, there are costs that go with that, but it's certainly something that we could very easily explore.
Okay. Councillor Coley will take the last
Thank you,
question.
Mayor. Ron, do you mind if I put this question to Dwight?
Absolutely.
And I just want to thank Dwight for showing me around, giving me a personal tour, I suppose you call it. I happened to be out there to watch a horse riding event, and thank you for that. And I must say that every time I've been there, it's been very busy and well utilised every time, particularly on weekends, as you mentioned. But when I got the tour from you, you mentioned the issue of how much the City of Swan spends on, and I thought it was quite a convincing argument, and changed my thinking somewhat on this. You mentioned how much the City of Swan spent on swimming pools, ovals, tennis courts, basketball courts, and spend on sporting facilities throughout the City of Swan. Would you mind elaborating a little bit more? And you got a little bit heated about this, and I don't mind if you do now, because I thought it was a good argument that you presented. And when you consider how much we spend on those facilities, the amounts that you're looking at are not that great in my view, but I'd like your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, it's just, I'm very conscious that you can't compare one against the other. It's not about playing, poor us. But I do think there's a little bit of inequity in this area in regard to the city, in regard to the State Equestrian Centre. So if I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, I was better prepared then because I was had been preparing the report. But essentially, if you look at the city's budget of what it takes to operate their Swan Active, Altona Pool, etc., all your facilities in the state, the income generated from those facilities, they run at a substantial loss. Places such as Lilac Hill, Swan Athletic, etc., all receive support in various ways or forms to keep the facilities running operational so the clubs can be there. State Equestrian Centre has historically, for 33 years, received no such operational support to keep the doors open. And I just don't understand the inequity and that unwillingness to support such a big business and City of Swan ratepayers that use the facility. The expectation to have such an equestrian facility in the city is a plus, not a minus for this city. Some of that we did actually itemise, Ron, was we had actually itemised some of the direct costs we wanted. One of them is the insurance of the State Equestrian Centre. We pay it on behalf of for us, obviously. It's part of our lease deal. That's odd $80,000 a year just for the centre. Some grounds work. So we kind of targeted what we felt was common sense for the city to provide. Maintenance of the grounds, the playing field, so to speak, the grass surfaces, pick up insurance, etc. So those type of things, very targeted to what the city would normally be doing at their normal recreational facilities that you already provide across the city. So it was really along those lines, and we just seem to miss out. And it's been a little bit historic because State Equestrian WA is a state sporting association. We're not a club, we're a group of clubs. The facility itself is fantastic, built, gifted to the city, been run for 33 years by Equestrian WA. Because of the structure of us, we're ineligible to get some grants from the state government to additional money for the facility. Because we're a state sporting association, they say the money should be coming from the local government, but local government, yourselves, gives money to clubs, not necessarily state sporting associations. So until the city steps up and actually says, okay, we're going to commit this money we've suggested for the redevelopment over a 3-year budget period, till you yourselves hopefully do that, then the state government's able to support that through the CSR FF grants, etc., commit state money, then federal money will follow. But state won't come first because it is owned by the city. So there's a real catch-22. We're in this constant treadmill that we can't move forward, and decisions need to be made in the year 21. We've put by the 1st of August. Otherwise, the facility's risk of being closed.
Councillor McNamara.
You mentioned, sorry, what membership, Councillor Richardson didn't get the answer. How many paid-up members have you got?
We've got 2,300, or just under 2,400 paid-up members of Equestrian WA.
And they pay $429 each year?
Yep, and various things. So we take in the organisation, I think last year took in 690-odd thousand in membership across all the categories.
And your colleague said that they pay $150 more than decent state people. So you're saying that decent state people are $280 a year as a member?
It varies across various states, but yes.
And your colleague also said that he used the word a very large amount. Now, grandfather type of statements are not acceptable in accounting, as you probably know very well. You have to put a figure on what your colleague said from the point of view of the input that this particular organisation and its members have actually brought to the city. You just can't actually come up with statements that they contribute a very large amount of money. So what is a very large amount of money?
Yeah, so there is, in the supporting documentation we've supplied to the city, there was a very similar study presented, conducted 2 years ago, I think it was 2 or 3, for the SIAC, which is the Sydney International Equestrian Centre. So that was built for the Olympics. It's on the outskirts of Sydney. It's a very similar location and similar model of running to the State Equestrian Centre, as in there's events held. People come from New South Wales and to all over New South Wales to compete at that facility. So they did substantial economic modelling on the dollars spent, someone coming, you hire. So from their figures, we've extrapolated, and the figures are in your paper, so with detail that they're the exact figures, that we can estimate that there's for the $500 and odd thousand worth of income generated through hire for people coming in, that X number of dollars additionally are spent by those people attending the facility and we estimate therefore from that the economic value, which is in my papers that's submitted to the council, which is we estimate about $1.something million.
And you're aware that you're trying to compare what the city spends on other facilities like athletic centres, football clubs, etc. Those particular families in those particular areas that are I suppose, take advantage of the city's facilities have to actually pay about $280 to $450 per year to their organisation for membership of those clubs. They don't get it for free, and they don't ask the city of Swan for anything different, for anything extra.
Yeah, I guess, and that's why I wasn't really comparing like for like. I'm saying, for instance, I've got a property in the Swan Valley, fortunately, but we live in Swan View, which is in Mundaring-shire. So we drive down and I swim at Swan Active Swimming Pool. I'm sure my fee I pay every day coming in the front door doesn't represent the cost of me swimming in that pool every day.
Well, that's for sure. But and the last I won't waste the council's time or your time on this. What paid staff have you got?
We've got, to run the State Equestrian Centre, we've got 3.8 full-time equivalent staff.
And
think it's 260 odd thousand per year, and that's. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Richards, last question.
Just a quick question. It was actually prior to Councillor McNamara asking, so it's quite similar, so I'm glad he jumped in after me. I guess taking into account the information that you provided tonight, and I've always been in awe when I've driven past with the kids and we talk about it and we go, wow, and I think we've always been a bit hesitant about coming in to look because it's basically a club that's maybe more affordable, or quite expensive for some families and probably out of the league of others. So any polo type, equestrian type, horse owning sort of activity isn't on the general scale of most ratepayers. So my question is, what has the centre got to offer that the average City of Swan ratepayer can actually go there and do, which isn't horse riding, which is one of the probably more expensive sports that you could possibly choose for a child or an adult to go and have a go at? What can the centre offer those ratepayers who are basically then helping to fund that? Whereas opposed to a swimming centre, which is quite affordable at $4 or $3.80 a child, $4.50 a child, do you know what I'm saying? Even as a parent, for me to want to go there and see what you do, what am I going to get back for my... People will be watching asking, well, you know, we're going to give $178,000 and we do give that to pools, we do run them at a loss, but people can access those facilities and use them and get something from those facilities. And when I drive past, I'm not sure what... I can't get horse riding lessons. I can't get... Do you know what I'm saying? What can I get from that? And I understand supporting you as well, but it is like a specific club that's not accessible to the general public. How about we let Mr
Fleming answer the question?
I guess there's two parts to that. So the first thing is that you become a member of Equestrian WA so that you can compete in official competitions. You then become members of clubs to be able to compete. So whilst it cost me $429 to renew my membership just the other day, I also had to pay membership for my horses because they gain points and things like that, so there's a cost there. But I'm also a member of 3 other clubs, equestrian clubs, they're dressage clubs because I do dressage, all based in the Swan Valley. So I'm a member of Swan River Dressage, Perth Dressage Club and Brookley Dressage. So cost-wise, for membership, is a lot more than that. That's only to be a member of the state association, and then there's other costs. So it is a little different to becoming members of just a sporting club, if you understand where we're coming from. So that was one, and I'm afraid because I wanted to just get that point in, I've just missed where I was answering there.
I understand it's more technical membership that you offer, and it's a limited style of a sporting interest or club. What can the City of Swan ratepayers actually get from the club in terms of knowing that their rates are helping to being distributed to the centre when they actually can't compete, or they don't own a horse and they can't physically use the centre?
A large number of them go out there and exercise their dogs regularly. They go out there and go to the river and use our showers and toilets and such like very regularly. No, they don't pay anything.
Why would you not charge, like the swimming centres charge $4 a
Because we can't... The way the facility is designed and that it's not a practical thing. It would cost us more to collect off them than it does to allow them to come. So we do quite a lot for the community along those lines, but it's not something for everyone. But there are a lot of things out there, and quite a lot of families go out there for the day out for something to do with their families, school holidays and such like. We'll often have families come out to see what's on out there, and it's free entertainment. The majority of things, there isn't a fee for spectators. Some of the major events that are out there, we do charge, but a lot of that is free from a community point of view. And in fact, over the years, there's been a number of times where councils had to deal with local residents, and most recently with COVID, where we weren't allowed to let people in, and they see it as their own public open space, or the local residents. So that's come across to be a number of you here that would have be aware of those complaints from the local residents. So we're quite happy for people to come, and as I say, collecting off those would cost more probably than is practical.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Dwight. Appreciate your
Mr
time.
Mayor, I was hoping to actually hear Mr Pedlow's deputation. I know it's been mixed up a little bit, but he may have more to add.
Well, what I've got here is 2 speakers with 5 minutes allowed. Got a written already. I don't know what more you're going to add, Dwight. I don't think there's much more to add, is there?
No, thank you, Councillor Henderson. No, I think that's pretty much summed it up. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, that leaves us now to the item C 3.1. You've had a written deputation from Karen Mowat. There is a confidential item with the deputation, so we now go behind closed doors to hear that deputation. I don't need a motion, councillor. It's an agenda forum. Okay, that takes us now to staff presentations, and the Manager of Statutory Planning will be presenting and answering questions on 4.1, 4.2. Councillor Callaghan, are you going to lead the room for those two? And also 4.3, and then Leon will be presenting on the Shady Hills, 4.9, the stated questions, and the Manager of Governance will be talking about 7.1. So take it away, Phil. Yeah, we'll come get yeah.
Mr Mayor, how long per item would you like the presentation, or at least my outline to be?
You can probably give us a 10-minute overview, Phil, perhaps, or
for all
whatever
three,
you
or
think
10 minutes for the 3 items that I'm charged with? 3 minutes per item, thereabouts? Okay,
much.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. The first item there, the presentation is on, is the proposed housing development in Devon Street, Woodbridge. I think the first thing is the report indicates that this is, and as you've heard this evening, this is what you might call a classic public-private partnership between the state government, who is bringing the land to the equation through the West Australian Planning Commission, the private sector, and not-for-profits, and the entity you've heard from My Homes Australasia. I think the first thing to state that the council, as you'd be aware, is not a decision maker on this application. It is application for the development of land that is a regional reservation for parks and recreation, so we are only making a recommendation. Nonetheless, the application was submitted with us, and we are charged with, in the first instance, doing the normal processing of the application, including the public advertising. So that was undertaken, and as the report indicates, there was 106 at the end of the advertising period. There was 163 submissions, split up in terms of 137 against, 26 for. Now, halfway through, or thereabouts, through the advertising of the application, city staff communicated in the first instance to the proponent an obvious concern around the proposed clearing of some of the, we can say subjectively, significant mature trees on the site. As chance would have it, and I think as you've heard this evening, the proponent must have realised that themselves and hurriedly submitted a modified application which reduced the numbers from 30 odd down to about 17 under the proposal. The submissions that came out of the public principally, and it's that detailed in the report, was a concern that this is a regional reserve and you shouldn't be using a regional reserve that's set aside for parks and recreation for housing development, homeless or otherwise. The submissions also noted concern with the extent of clearing of the native trees on the site, with a query as to whether or not that represents the destruction of potential or actual fauna habitat. Submitters also raised concerns, going back to the theme that's been alluded to here, about whether this is appropriate location, by saying, well, look, this is situated between the passenger rail line and the freight rail line, and whether it's appropriate given the noise impacts around that are generated by that rail line on what would be residents. Submissions also raised queries as to whether or not this was, and you've heard it again, whether this is an isolated pocket that hasn't got good connections to services, principally services in the Midland Strategic Regional Centre. There was other submissions that indicated whether or not the actual style of the development was consistent with the heritage values of Woodbridge, and there was also concerns around adverse social impacts. We're not, or the report to you this evening is not intending to evaluate the model of that's being proposed here in terms of providing a housing for homeless. So there are no sociological or technical arguments around a social service in the report. It's purely based on planning grounds. And our response to the submissions, at least in the report, is saying, yes, fair enough. If this is being proposed to be developed up for 15 years or more, as you've heard this evening, let's get the structure of the planning framework right. If this land is being given up by the WAPC because it's surplus to requirements, well, perhaps they should go through the process of validating that by Metropolitan Region Scheme amendments. So we say that's the first thing that perhaps should happen. We're comfortable enough that the vegetation that is on the site will be retained under a modified proposal that's reduced the number of units, and that can be accommodated. What we've said, however, though, is that the site, and they didn't submit a bushfire assessment, there was queries on that. The site to date hasn't demonstrated that they can achieve the requisite bushfire attack level of BAL 29. We've got concerns that some of the vegetation in the rail corridor could render it a high rating, but the proponent has indicated this evening that they're comfortable that they can achieve that. Fair enough, we haven't seen that, so we've taken a precautionary approach by recommending that it needs to be established first. In relation to the rail noise, there is a condition in there. The report talks about it being a requirement, at least from the WAPC, that they're able to achieve the quiet noise packages in the housing designed to mitigate against the rail noise. The proponent had proposed another measure other than what is typified in the state planning policy. That may be fine, but I think it's the onus is, or should be on them to demonstrate that. In relation to the location of itself, yes, we accept the notion that perhaps the people that will occupy this may not have access to a private vehicle, and that will force them to walk. This section of Devon Street, there is a footpath, but of course, as we know, when we get to the point where it's crossing the level crossing, there isn't actually any dedicated pedestrian crossing there, and maybe that's something the state government should look at if they're going to put permanent residents here, or at least residents here that might not be reliant on it or have access to a car. And noting, of course, that there is the only other way of getting across the rail line to Great Eastern Highways to use one of the two subway arrangements. And look, I think it's well understood there are obviously reservations by some members of the community around the comfortableness of using that sort of access. In terms of the Woodbridge guidelines, it's been pointed out here quite correctly, they don't actually apply on a regional reservation. It's not covered by this, but I think you've heard from the proponent that they're happy to make some modifications to their window treatments to maybe make it a little bit more in keeping with some of the other buildings. In relation to the social impacts, well, look, again, we're not in a position to comment on that, but it seems, or at least it seems that the design there's nothing about it that would appear to be isolationist or not conducive to an amenable relationship between the residents there. As you can see the pictures, it does almost look like a camp or holiday home, which has orientation of balconies. At least it presents as the prospect of something that might be quite amenable to residents. So in the end, the staff recommendation is qualified to say, well, look, taking a conservative approach, not to recommend that the Commission support it unless certain key criteria are met, inclusive of the changing the MRS reservation to something more appropriate for housing, be that urban, that they're able to demonstrate that they can meet the bushfire requirements, and that they perhaps tweak the design somewhat to make it a bit more in keeping with what the Woodbridge guidelines suggest. So that's the nature of the recommendation in front of you, Mr Mayor.
Questions? Councillor Scully.
Thanks, Phil, for that. I'm just having a flick through policy 5.3 from WAPC, which is the use of land reserved for parks and recreations and regional open space. And the condition, there's a number of conditions set in terms of what it has to satisfy. There's a number of conditions to get use of it. The community and the local government support the proposal. That's one of the mandatory things. If we don't support it, how can this policy, are we able to use this policy in some sort of rejection of this proposal? Because it also talks about where the WAPC is the landowner, specific guidance is required to ensure that applications for the use of the WAPC-owned land can be dealt with consistently and in harmony with the reserve purpose. I mean, there's a number of things in this document that suggest that this is not the appropriate use of land, no matter how you look at it, according to their own policy. And I want to...
Well, through Mr. Mayor, yes, and look, and that's why the actual recommendation, I suppose, when we look at it, says, advise the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage that the City of Swan is not in a position to support the concept of using the land for that purpose unless, and number one is, the lands are first appropriately zoned urban under the Metropolitan Region Scheme. So absolutely, it's acknowledgement that whichever way you look at it, if it's a Parks and Recreation Reserve, it's therefore active recreational use, or at least, as it might be, an open piece of grassland with some trees that is integrated into other areas in this location that are the Parks and Recreation. So it seems to me that, and so this is what we've said, if the Commission is saying, okay, well we've appointed these proponents to utilise this piece of land, then it would seem they've already decided that the land must be surplus to requirements or not have attributes that they think is worthy of its reservation. If that's the case, then it would be orthodox to accept that, and as you pointed out there, in line with that policy, we'll then say, not by not contravening the policy, by simply taking the view, okay, well we rezone the land. So I mean that's why it is the principal planning reason there is it's a Parks and Recreation Reserve, and this is clearly not Parks and Recreation. It is a form of permanent residential development.
No other questions? Carry on to the next one, Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The second presentation is on
Midland Meals.
the Midland Meals. You've heard the presentations this evening. The application in physical fact is, as you're aware, it's a converted sea container that's been customised that wants to be permanently situated on a location within the car park just adjacent here. It's the proponents have cited that in a location. I think it's fair to say that the car park location after hours, and I've noticed increasingly, perhaps with the shift in employees at Midland, at Landgate, after hours, as we'd see, the car parking numbers are dwindling. So our first consideration here is that this is a public purpose reserve for car parking. Will it prejudice that in any way, having a fixture such as this? The report is saying because of the area that has been taken up, because of the time in which the area is going to be used for these meals, is effectively after hours. Most of the patrons or users of the car park around the times that the meals are being served have left the car park, so the disruption to the principal purpose of it as a parking facility we're comfortable with is minimal. There are a number of other control arrangements in the report around trying to ensure that there is a degree of security and organisation around all of that. Those are all in there as recommended conditions. So overall, we're comfortable enough that approval can be issued. I think it's important to know, you might say this is what we might call a trial approval. It's time limited. Time limited approvals will allow the council to see how this facility, I mean, I know it's operating presently, But moving forward around this, it's an opportunity to see how it will operate, whether the concerns about bringing in excessive numbers of people from further afield across the metropolitan region might present issues or difficulties that the current arrangement doesn't have. A time-limited approval allows Council the luxury, rightly, to review the performance of the approval over a period of 1 year, bring it back and decide whether it's happy to continue it or not, and that gives Council the perfect discretion. So that's the nature of the recommendation in front of Council, Mr Mayor.
Okay. Questions? Councillor Richardson.
Just a quick question, thanks, Phil. The canopies that are on the outside of the container,
Yes.
they'll just stay out permanently?
I think the presenter explained that during deputation.
Were they
They'll be put
retractable?
out during inclement weather.
Sorry?
They will be only put out during inclement weather.
Are they permanent or are they attached then?
Well, you've seen an awning on a caravan.
I've only seen the hand drawing on here.
That's what
So,
they got.
We go to the-
Mr Pratt explained that during the
right.
presentation.
And just quickly, do the security cameras that are currently in the car park then cover that, that area?
No, I believe that they don't at present, and that's why there is a condition there indicating that that needs to be provided so that we do have that coverage.
Councillor Johnson.
Oh, thanks, Mr Mayor. Yeah, Phil. Mr Pratt said there was a water supply. Is that correct? A tap.
He takes a 40-litre container of water and tap on it.
All right, okay. Thanks.
I was going to say, my 18 years here, I've never noticed a tap out in the car park. I must have been missing something if there was.
That's
but,
what I was thinking too.
No.
Further questions? Okay, Phil, the next one, which is the civil works in Bellevue.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
And could someone just recall Councillor Catalano, please? Thanks, John. Right, Phil, carry on.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, councillors, as you will recall, this matter was deferred at the first presentation because there was correctly an imprecision in the representation of the comments from the Department of Water and Environment Regulation. We've included the subsequent response from DEWA in this, and they have indicated here that they note, and this has been stated already, that the site anecdotally is listed as potentially contaminated. I think the crux of the advice from DEWA is they're indicating that, well, and they indicated to us that it was not a requirement for a formal environmental management plan for the rehabilitation here, which is peculiar, but nonetheless we've imposed it as a condition. DEWA only indicated it's an advice, and I think what they've done here is that they have, as far as the imposing formal environmental management plans in relation to the contaminated site, they may have indicated that the scope of the works here is probably, and the nature of what's being proposed is probably sufficient if it's proposing to be simply used for industrial purposes. Some of the points raised by the resident group, which are fair points when they're talking about a desire that under ballast that some of this existing general industrial zone land ought to be pursued for rezoning. Can't say it's in the proponents, but often we look at it, well, why would the proponent be remediating when they might be required to not remediate so much simply for industrial purposes? We can't rule out the fact that they might be trying to fully remediate in support of a proposal potentially for it to go to residential, which, subject to aircraft noise not prejudicing anything, it would probably require it being suitably remediated. But certainly we do have the formal correspondence from DEWA. They'd indicated, well, and this is their advice, I'll read it, they said an appropriate environmental management plan should be prepared to address the risks associated with potential exposure and disturbance of soil contamination, including asbestos-containing materials within the uncontrolled construction and demolition waste products within the site, on-site clay pit during evacuation and remedial works. We've placed that as a condition rather than an advice note to say you need to do that as a condition of approval, and that might be normally prior to doing any works, they submit all of that. So that's I think probably the only or key issue around this application, Mr. Mayor.
Questions? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've also spoken to Mr. Storm quite a bit, and he's and also Mark, I'm always forgetting his surname, Richards, about this, and that they do. Some of the concerns indicate. First of all, you heard Mr. Storm talking about he felt that a licence was needed to undertake this work, but couldn't explain what sort of licence was needed. And I asked him whether it was possible that our planners had forgotten or inadvertently overlooked the need for such a licence. What can you comment on that? Can you comment on that?
It may be that Mr. Storm or Mr. Richards is, certainly Dewar haven't advised us that you need a works approval or licence. If you are undertaking the work so that you were bringing external material to the site and screening and processing that for the infill, then you would probably need a Class 1 inert landfill licence. The fact that no fill is actually in the first instance or material is being brought and screened and processed to put in the land might be the basis as to why a Class 1 inert landfill works approval and licence isn't required. If you're bringing material, and council will recall very many numbers of applications for landfill or filling where they're actually bringing building rubble, screening it on the site, sifting it, processing it, putting in there, where in this instance it's taking out what they've got. And so already what's in the site, not stuff that they're bringing extraneously, and doing those activities. Certainly, I would very much hope if we refer an application to the Department of Water Environment Regulation that they would be able to say definitively whether the nature of the works requires a works approval and licence under their Act. So having got the formal confirmation where previously we'd had officer level advice, I'm comfortable that the nature of the proposal is such that it doesn't require those, otherwise this agency would have advised. But it sounds like Mr. Storm or Mr. Richards are, fair enough, pursuing their own inquiries with Dewar on that matter.
Just to follow up on that, I think the line of reasoning that they're following is this, that if a licence is needed in order to perform this separation activity, if the fill was being brought to the site, so that's a fact. I think what they're contending is the fill has been brought to the site, but it was brought 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I think that is the reason why they think a licence is needed. Does that make sense? Could Dewar have overlooked that? It
could well be. I don't know the nature of the inquiries by either Mr. Richards or Mr. Storm with Dewar. It would be surmising as to why they form those conclusions or why those queries are, other than this agency hasn't advised us that that was a requirement. But I would add, in any event, as we've said many times before, in an environment where there are multiple statutes at work in Western Australia, if they did require one under the Environmental Protection Act, irrespective of whether Dewar advised us that they require that or not, the proponent would be obliged to obtain one and would seemingly be in breach if they started doing this work under a planning approval without such a works approval or licence. So there would be, in any event, a natural incumbency upon them to work out, as it is with all proponents, that they are compliant with other laws, particularly around the Environmental Protection Act, around this type of activity.
If there is a requirement on them to have such a licence and they go ahead without it, then regardless of whether or not we've put such a condition on the approval, they're still required to conform with that licence that we don't know about at the moment. Now, this brings me on to another question. So, there's the issue of the licence that we're not sure they might need to have, and then there's the second issue as to whether the current state of environmental regulation that covers these former tip sites, of which there are quite a number in the city, particularly in the Midland Guildford ward. Do we have
sufficient regulation over this reprocessing activity to ensure that the residents, and it is, I think it is residential on two sides, that they are sufficiently protected against the risk of some extremely noxious substance being uncovered and being blown over their houses. Is there a risk there that we need to be considering? Because that, I think, is what they are stating. They have a great fear of something quite nasty being down there.
Well, that's entirely understandable. We've required as condition 4, and it says this: prior to commencement of any works on site, the applicant owner is to submit to the satisfaction of the City of Swan an environmental management plan which will address the risks associated with the potential exposure and disturbance of soil contamination, including asbestos-containing materials, which is, that condition is literally the advice note of dual verbatim. And what I would say is so that if the council's of a mind to approve this, that condition will require them to submit it. And what we would do in the ordinary course with that is we would take that plan and refer it to DURA and say, are you happy with this, that this is orderly, before we say it's approved, and before then that they can commence the work. So their risks are actually completely properly addressed by imposing that requirement as a condition and not leaving it, strangely enough, as some nebulous and unapplicable advice note. So we've actually strengthened and responded in the report to the very understandable concerns that the community has.
Okay, so there is going to be a risk management plan in place. So I guess there's two further questions. One is, can this be conditioned, assuming it's going to be taking place outdoors, to be done during the winter months, so that the ground is wet and there's less chance of dust being blown up?
In short, Mr Mayor, it could be. What the other thing here in terms of looking at the overall risk, as you would see at condition 2, it says this approval is valid for 12 weeks. So this condition here is, you might say, has been imposed as a insurance against, and I was having a discussion with a proponent today, an insurance against the model of using the cover of filling land to basically do a waste processing facility. I'm not going to mention any names within the City of Swan. But if it only takes so long to do a piece of work, then after a certain point of time, if it's not completed, you're wondering, well, what's really going on? So if they're saying that they want to rehab this and that they're not doing a Class 1 inert landfill by bringing material elsewhere and screening and processing it and putting into the back into the soil, then condition 2, which says this approval is valid for 12 weeks, which is what they've said, it'll take us 12 weeks to do this work. Okay, well, we'll give you an approval for 12 weeks. Now, that hasn't said do it in the winter months or whatever, but the intention of it is to ensure that the disruption, obviously, to the surrounding residents is for 3 months only. No, 4 months, beg your pardon, 4 months, 12 weeks. So that they do it in an orderly manner and they crack on with it and they do it and they complete it and they're done and dusted. Pardon the pun.
And would it be reasonable to request to include it in the motion to place the environmental management plan in an agenda for noting, so that the public, the people in Bellevue, can actually read it and have access to it? Would that be a reasonable condition to add in?
Oh, look, it's entirely at the discretion of council. If it wants to say that they provide something and then that document then be... there's no law that says after it's approved it can't be circulated.
Thank you.
If the council wishes to include that as a condition or just expresses a separate resolution to desire that happens.
That's all from me at this stage. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Lucas.
I was just going to suggest that Councillor Johnson, if he's looking at putting any other conditions on, if he's worried about that licence from DEWA, is to put it in as a condition, as that any appropriate licence required comes under 3 or 4. And that it's up to the applicant to make sure they get the licence if required.
Right. Any other further questions, Phil, on those presentations or any other planning items on the agenda? Councillor Callaghan?
Yeah, I do too.
I wanted to have a chat to you about or ask some questions of you about 4.6, the catalyst.
Yes.
Right. So 31 units, is that correct? 31 units, 12 of them won't have sunlight.
Well, 12 of them won't have. No, it's not true to say they won't have sunlight. They won't have. They won't have direct sunlight.
Correct.
Yes,
they
direct
won't
sunlight.
have appropriate amenity. So the question is, how can this holistically, if you could please explain to me how this can holistically be, I just have to try and find the words, basically a good catalyst for the new junction?
I think it's important to note, and I can speak, my own house has all of this, depending on the outlook. Some of the rooms in my house don't have direct sun, but it's not dark and it's not a hole. It's got light, diffused light. So when these instruments talking about direct sun, and particularly with the priority in these designs things to winter sun, and the test or the standard has always been winter sun at midwinter's day, 12 noon, 21st of June. So they are. I think it's obvious that with sites, it may well be an impossibility to orientate development in a way that is good design by having every single unit with access to direct sun. So what the proponent's done here, what Design WA, the new document, is saying is it's talking about, it's got a threshold in terms of not saying every single unit should, but there should be it's got a benchmark of about, I think it was about 12% of the units. But one of the other things they've done with this new document, okay, and we're working our way through it as many local governments are, is that unlike some of the instruments that we have at the moment, typically the R codes, which say if you meet the acceptable development provisions, you meet the performance criteria, so you're compliant. This new instrument is saying, here's some suggested means of meeting the requirement, but even if you don't meet that, there are other criteria, or even if you do meet it, it's not intended to say that automatically then it should be ticked as good design. It's one way of doing it, so it's pushing you towards the design outcomes. So in this instance here, what the proponent has done and after this has gone to the Office of the Government Architect, who very generously, in the absence of a design review panel that we are working hard to set up, the Office of the Government Architect very generously, as they did the first time around with stage 1 of the catalyst development, they have done an assessment against this and accepted that, or noted some of those discrepancies, if you will, at least against the recommended threshold of units that have direct sunlight, and have made some suggestions, and the proponent has come back and actually added to that by compensating by having clerestory windows and other windows that don't provide direct sun, but a bit like my place at home, diffuses the light. So the place is still light without a sunbeam coming in through the window. So you're still getting a degree of amenity in terms of sunlight without having, and in some instances, some people might say in Western Australia, sometimes less sun through your windows is more. It's a matter of choice, I suppose, and it might depend on the thermal setup of your house.
But your house has got rooms that don't have direct sunlight, but it also has rooms that have direct sunlight. These are flats. They don't have direct sunlight at all, and they don't have any access.
Some of them don't, yes. Some of
I
them
mean,
don't
these
have
particular 12, which is
Yes.
30%
Yes.
of the overall number of flats there. And they don't actually have a chance to actually walk out of their flat and get direct sunlight either. So these are quite a substantial number of, wouldn't you say? I mean, a substantial number of units that actually.
Well, they're more than they're more than the 12% that,
Yes.
that the design guidelines has indicated as a, for what it's worth, as a
Okay.
as an indicator of the
All
number.
right.
Yes,
And one
that's
other question.
irrefutable.
What's the chances of this proponent redesigning this so that actually there is a really good quality development there that actually the kind of people that I imagine, because I believe they're advertised as executive apartments, and I believe that's the kind of thing that Catalyst was actually set out to do, or tried to set out to do. What's the chances of the proponent redesigning this so that they actually do achieve this a really good high quality development that actually is comprising executive apartments, you know, that has sunlight?
I can't say what the chances of the proposed designing. What they would probably say is they'll say these are good quality executive apartments, as they are for a number of reasons. That may be their situation. Look, it's open to the council, of course, to make a recommendation to that if the council decides that it wants to advance to the JDAP, who are the determining authority here, if it wants to advise that it is of the view that the recommendation should be one to say that it has an issue with the quality of the design by virtue of there being the numbers of units that they have without provision of direct access to sunlight. Look, it's open to do so. If it's taken, if that recommendation persuades the development assessment panel of the same, then it may well be that I suppose conceivably you're probably looking for mine. You're probably looking at something that would be a refusal that would require these guys to go back to the drawing board. But certainly the Office of the Government Architect has noted that and suggested, well, not, and this is the interesting thing about these, not to say the design is unacceptable, but they've certainly made a recommendation that, well, maybe the applicant should be encouraged to look at that. And that was put to, that recommendation was put to the proponents, and they've come back and said, well, we think it's fine for all these reasons, and we've endeavoured to evaluate that in the report. But it's open to the council to do that, for sure.
Questions of Phil? Thanks, Phil. Oh, sorry, Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. Phil, on item 4.4, this is the land in Averley. What lot sizes are proposed for the land there? There's an adjacent development, of course. I don't know what lots, what the R coding for that would be, but it would look like it's probably about 40 or something.
Through Mr Mayor, this is a metropolitan region scheme.
Yeah, I get
rezoning,
that.
And I'm having a quick. This wasn't a report that came directly through me, but I'm comfortable enough in looking at it. I'm familiar with metropolitan region scheme members' reports. There is nothing in here that would indicate a coding. Obviously, if it's rezoned under our scheme, then a coding would apply. If it's rezoned, I don't see anything here to indicate
I don't see
what the
anything
local
either.
planning scheme. It just says, for example, it says to rezone the land to a suitable zone like residential development. Now, residential development would say you lodge a structure plan, and that would come before the council for a recommendation. And at that point, they would be looking at what the coding is. Generally, in the past, you found that the coding is consistent with the surrounding land to fit in, but of course, sometimes proponents then like to tweak it up a bit, as we all know, without being too cynical, and often go one or two bits and pieces or codings higher than what the surrounding area is. And certainly in this location, there's.
So Phil, the reason I ask is that there's been quite a bit of traffic discussion on land adjacent to Shadow Place and the properties on Tokay Lane about potentially seeking larger lot sizes adjacent to that. And so that's why I sort of wanted to probe a little bit about where we were going with the longer term as it goes through the process.
Well, I'll offer a quick planning comment. Looking at this, as you can see, you've got Allenbrook one side and parts of Ballas and the Swan Valley on the other. A good orderly planning process would be that you might start from one side with something more urban and transition and phase through to something at the other end, abutting the Swan Valley that's a bit larger.
So should we perhaps recommend that in the comment that goes back?
Oh, look, through you, Mr Mayor, I think the council can be very comfortable that if the zoning is residential development, they require a structure plan. The structure plan will be lodged and will come back through you as the council, and you'll be able to well and truly put those recommendations in place.
Okay, thank you. And the next one for me is 4.5. Again, in terms of the development, our coding, so is this going to be R20 or is it going to be R60 or what's it going to be? This is 4.5. So we recommended our 20, I think.
Mr. Mayor, through you, if you allow me. Councillor, if you look on page 225, you'll see that there's a component of residential R coding proposed in the southeastern corner, which will be R20.
Yeah.
That's the only part of the site that is earmarked for residential development. The special use zone area is specifically earmarked for aged care development. Right. So the only component will be that R20 part on the southeastern side.
In that part. Okay, thank you. I want to be clear about that. Thank you, Mayor. Just on 13.4, did someone withdraw that?
No, I haven't asked for withdrawals yet, but we'll get around to that.
I wasn't here when it was dealt with, that's why I asked.
No, I haven't done any withdrawals yet. Okay. Councillor Kellano?
Just about the Aveley one, and just following on from what Councillor Henderson was talking about with the larger lots and, you know, going from Allenbrook to Swan Valley. But isn't there a benefit to actually put that in the recommendation now, that there is that transition of lots, rather than wait until it comes back with a structure plan? I mean, isn't it better to put it in initially and to get the message out there from the beginning, rather than wait and maybe perhaps miss it later down the track and give everyone the sort of wrong idea?
Through Mr Mayor, you look, it never hurts to flag your intentions early. In fact, I recall several years ago now, the council did something similar in areas of Aveley abutting the Swan Valley, where it wanted to see larger transition lot sizes. Unfortunately, I thought the very reasonable requirements of one of the ward councillors at the time that the council supported, unfortunately, wasn't taken up by the West Australian Planning Commission. But absolutely, it doesn't hurt to flag your intention early if you wish to do so in this instrument. Yes.
No other questions? Sorry, Councillor. Okay. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, so on the next one, there's a couple of items from Mr Coaten, being 5.8, secondary access to Shady Hills, and 5.9, which is the State Equestrian Centre.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the Shady Hills Second Access Road, that's an item that's
Councillors, if you don't mind, we have a presentation having. Thank you.
It's been before Council in a number of different formats before, in terms of planning items and also the bushfire issue. So, in essence, the subdivision at the time of Shady Hills was approved with one access and egress, which was in accordance with appropriate planning mechanisms at the time. There is some, those requirements have now changed, but there is some risk of, in the event of bushfires in the area. That's been raised on an ongoing basis by the community up there. And the city undertook a risk assessment in relation to the bushfire safety and found out that there was a significant risk. So what we're proposing is essentially a shared arrangement to address that issue, with the city providing some funding, and the state government providing some funding for an access road through an adjoining subdivision, and the developer of that subdivision constructing that as part of the first stage of the subdivision, and then as the lots are sold, repaying the city on a basis based on the traffic volumes of a 57%, 43% split, so the 43% being the amount that's generated within the subdivision that the developer would be should normally would be responsible for. So there's a number of reasons why we believe the state government should be contributing to this. Obviously, the state government approved the original Shady Hills estate, and so as part of that, obviously, that's essentially what's created the issue. So the state government also manages significant land holdings in that area as well, and this road will also provide them with some access to the Avon Valley Rail Corridor as well, so there's a lot of benefits for them in relation to that. As outlined in the report, there are other subdivisions within the city that do have this similar issues, so there is a danger that council could be creating a precedent by approving this road, but there was a written deputation by Shirley Routley on the matter, and I think she actually addressed the issue of precedent quite well, in that this is a unique situation where there is a subdivision that's occurring adjacent to the situation, and the developer is willing to give up to cede the land to build the road. So it's a case of all the ducks lining up in this particular case. So the city's recommending, staff recommending a shared some cost sharing in relation to addressing that issue.
Questions, Jim? Councillor Carolina.
Thank you. Going back to 2018, DFES strongly opposed this road, correct?
I don't believe that's the case.
They were opposed to it because it was in excess of 600 metres and wasn't... that was... I looked up the report from 2018.
I might have to defer to Mr Bishop on that one.
Came before council in 2018, went out to public comment. DFES are strongly opposed to this road layout, including the proposed road linking Clarkson to Lade Road.
I think I can answer that.
Yeah.
If you recall, Mr Bishop, the proposal then was from the landowner to cut a dirt road, just simply cut a dirt road and put a partially locked gate on both ends. Now, I remember council argued very, very strongly because of the topography is very steep, and to just cut a track through there was particularly dangerous when you're getting people under stress trying to leave a fire zone. And it was very, very strongly put to us and to those people who know the area that it would be a greater danger for people to come out there in that situation in a fire and possibly become trapped, in the danger of getting lost on the landowner's property, and who was going to take responsibility for that, given it was already on private land. So it's not a place where you just cut a dirt track and drive through. It's very steep topography.
But at the time, it wasn't proposed to have a dirt track, was it?
Yes, it was.
In 2008, it was proposed
that's what we
to have a
discussed
dirt
back in
track.
2018, yeah.
Okay. All right. So what's DFES got to say, or fees, or whoever they are now, what have they got to say about putting this road through now?
Look,
we've consulted with DFES as part of the risk assessment and with the brigades up there. As part of this process, if council resolves to move forward on this, then obviously we'll be developing the project further and advising and seeking comment from DFES.
Because, what we're talking about is a really large sum of money again, and that worries me as well, because we're talking about it's going to cost possibly over $5 million, and again, how much over $5 million? That's $5 million that other ratepayers don't get the benefit of in the city. And so, once again, I think we need some proper costings for this road, because if we approve it and it sort of starts rolling on, before we know it, it could be, it's a long bit of road, it could actually spiral out to maybe 10 million.
Well, the 5 million is the estimate, but the city's ultimate contribution for that is proposed to be 950,000. So we're seeking two-thirds of the money from the state, and the 43% of the city's contribution
but I've got
paid back.
Yeah, I've got some concerns about that as well, because last week we heard that actually lot sizes of 5 acres, so that's 2.5 hectares, around about that, weren't going to be supported anymore in bushfire-prone areas because basically just too hard to protect and defend in case of bushfire. So the question is then, is this subdivision, which is basically 5-acre lots that we're going to rely on for this DCP contribution, is this subdivision actually... I mean, I know the subdivision hasn't been done, so we're talking about the structure plans being done. But is this subdivision actually ever going to take place?
Well, I can't answer that. I mean, obviously, the developer is progressing it. The structure plan's been approved by WAPC, so there obviously is that intention that it would proceed.
So why the very complicated? There was such complicated language in the actual proposal, which was that basically, where is it? We were going to go ahead with it, but then we weren't going to go ahead with it if the structure plan lapsed. But we were going to go ahead with it. But if the structure plan, where is that? But it was very complicated language, and I actually could not understand whether. Here we are, recommendation. Whether it's authorised to go ahead and get the loan. So we're going to get a loan before we even know how much this project is going to cost. And then it was going to enter into agreement. So it's quite, a substantial amount of work on it. And then it was like, not proceed if the structure plan is cancelled. So I didn't understand how you can do so much work and get a loan and everything like that if the structure plan at some point gets cancelled. Unless, of course, there was an anticipation that the structure plan was going to be cancelled after the road's built.
Yeah, the loan would only be drawn down as part of the actual construction.
It says here 21-22 annual budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the structure plan... Is there some kind of anticipation that the structure plan is going to be cancelled in the next 12 months or 2 years?
I don't believe there's any anticipation. There is always the possibility that something like that could happen, and that wording's in the recommendation just to clarify the situation if it does occur.
I just found the wording of the recommendation, it struck me that actually it's almost as if there's some kind of anticipation that this structure plan is going to lapse. And that we've got to get in there quick and borrow the money so that we can build this road.
I think the acting CEO wants to...
That was the impression I'm getting from it.
Mr Mayor, just to clarify the way that the recommendation is written, the first item gives the CEO the authority to prepare a budget that considers taking loan funding. That's the first instruction that we would take from Council. If you note item number 4, it's if Council approves this proposal, that the costings be confirmed and that any reference to costings in the agreements outlined in items 1 to 3 be proportionately adapted to reflect any increase in costing. And the note in item 2 that it's subject to the structure plan being maintained and the state government committing to 2/3 of the funding of the 57% is to protect the city's interest, in that a deed will be written to ensure that the city's funds and our contribution is protected.
Can I just ask then, at what point in this kind of negotiations with the landowners and with the bank and with the state government does this project actually start?
Mr. Mayor, it would... Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would require the negotiation first with the state government. Council would then be in a position to include that on their annual budget, which is the authority to take a loan, and that loan would be drawn down at the point that the road is being planned and constructed and the city requires the fund to make the payment.
Okay, sorry, I still don't understand the time frame. Is this all being done in 1 year or 2 years, or how many years is this going to be done?
Well, it depends on the timing of the development, and the timing of sorting the agreement out, and the timing of getting money from the state government. But it would be feasible to construct it within 1 year if all the ducks line up.
Chances of getting the money from the state government in 1 year, you think are high?
I can't
Jim, is it
speculate
worth
on
clarifying that the city's not responsible for the whole $5 million? The arrangement is the landowner.
Yeah.
It's a 57-43%
Yes.
split. If you have a look in the report on page 359, paragraph 2, says that the city's commitment at this point is $2.15 million, and the 43% contribution to the landowner to cover all costs associated with seeding the land, design and construction of the road connecting Clarkson Road, plus interest incurred by the loan, be recovered from the owner at a rate of $9,817,000 per lot. Sorry, $9,817 per lot. So the city's commitment is $2.1 million, being representing 57%, and the landowner's contribution is 43%. So it's a DCP for their 43% contribution.
So long as this structure plan isn't lapsed.
The deal was always been that when the structure plan was approved, then we could negotiate this deal with the landowner.
Yeah.
In the unlikely event that the structure plan would lapse for whatever reason, I can't think of one, then the recommendation we don't proceed with it because there's no recovery from the landowner.
Okay. So one final question then. So is it likely that we're going to get subdivision, is going to be subdivided, this DCP, into 5-acre lots, or is the, the sort of Bell kind of fire requirements at the moment for it to be more intensely subdivided, or will that subdivision for the 5-acre lots go ahead?
The structure...
Mr Vanderlyn, you could probably answer that the current structure plan is for urban development at this point in time, from memory.
The rural residential structure plan through which this road traverses is rural residential, and on the recollection that the lot sizes will be, there will be a variance of lot sizes, somewhere between maybe the smallest around a hectare up to 4 hectares. So it will be a mix of lots. One other thing that one must just not miss in the whole process. Say, for instance, so what we've discussed until now was the financing of the construction of the road, but part of the arrangement is that the land is given off for free by the landowners. One must just consider that so in a worst scenario, if the development doesn't go ahead, you may not get the payment. For many years, you won't get any reimbursement from a development's point of view, but you got the land for free.
Councillor Lucas.
So I just want to clarify, Mr Mayor, the city's total outlay after we get paid back money, and if the state government doesn't come to fund the $1.9 million, we don't borrow the money up front, but the city's outlay is $950,000 only. Well, on page 364, Mr Coaten said it.
Yeah, that's the amount after the developer pays back the money, their contribution of the 43%. So the city's total contribution at the end of the day would be of the...
1.9 from the state government, 2.15 from the landowner, and 950,000 from the City of Swan.
And if that's not put in place, the road doesn't get built.
If If
that
the state
correct?
government doesn't fund the 1.9, the road doesn't get built.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it's in the report. Councillor Johnson.
Oh yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, we've got to my part now, which is the question about the 950,000 and the justification of that. So that 950,000 is going to be paid by ratepayers right across the whole city. Is that right? And that's going to be used to build this. Basically the city's contribution to building that road, which is not there at the moment. Those houses in the Shady Hills estate are there, and the real question is, what is the justification for the body of ratepayers, the total ratepayers in the city, funding that 950,000? Jim, can you give any insight into that?
Well, the primary issue is addressing the issue of bushfire risk in Shady Hill subdivision.
Yeah, now, I've been there during the incident. I think it was 2 years ago, and my observations were two. One, that having seen this before council, and then seeing it on the ground as a firefighter, I was absolutely dumbfounded by the difference in my comprehension. It's extraordinarily steep, but then again, there's vehicle access for firefighters is, at least on the top of the ridge, is extremely easy. And given how easy it is to mobilise very large numbers of trucks, surely the risk is mitigated by the availability of DFAS and the bushfire brigades to protect those houses. So I'm just questioning.
We did have
why we need to do it.
We did have an independent, and that's sort of been part of the delay from when it came back, when it was last at council bringing back. We've had an independent assessment done of the bushfire risk, which did identify this as being construction of this road as being a high priority.
I mean, it is definitely a dangerous location. But I guess the question then is, surely the 950,000 should be funded by a special area rate of those people who feel they're at risk. So if they don't feel that the fire service is sufficiently protecting them, and then they want this additional road, while it's reasonable for the city to facilitate it, it's not reasonable for the entire group of ratepayers to fund it. Surely it should be a special area rate.
Yeah, that was one of the items that staff did consider, but it didn't meet the criteria for it. Mrs. Lay can perhaps explain it in a little bit more detail.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the requirements to satisfy raising a SAR are very specific, and they must just benefit that group of people. And our previous experience in implementing some SARs, we actually had to go back and quash those rates because it wasn't a strong enough justification, and we don't believe this is a strong enough justification either.
Next question, to try to avoid paying the 950,000, assuming this is all successful, is why can't the state government fund all of the balance of the 2.85 million? I've got an answer to that one. Did we ask?
I think we've tried that, haven't we, Jim, over the years?
Yeah, I mean, the Mayor will probably know more about those formal approaches in relation to that, but at the at the end of the day, it is a local road, and it is a city road, and so there is we're recommending some, I guess, shared, proportionate action to reduce the risks in this case. So a bit of a compromised solution to try and address the risk.
So I guess we're in the business of building roads. There's a risk, and you've taken all reasonable steps to try to avoid overspending. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Councillor.
Just to state, we are in, I said before, the swings and roundabouts business. When we need stuff in Ballajura, the people of Ellenbrook pay for it. When the people of Ellenbrook need something, Ballajura pays for that, don't pay for that, or whatever. So we're running our business as a whole city, not as a road up in Shady Brook or whatever else it is, right? So we have to look after people whenever they need looking after, irrespective of what corner of the city it is. So please don't be saying every time it comes up, and the same thing happened tonight with our friends from the hospital, the friends you. Everybody will have to pay for what they're looking for if they get it, if we make a decision. Everybody will have to pay. So please, hopefully, again, if everybody's just settles down.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Now, Councillor, we've got another 20 minutes of time left. Jim, do you want to comment on your question, Senator?
Yes, I'll make a few quick comments on that. So as was outlined, there has been a long-term peppercorn lease at that location with the group. And you've heard me say in this chamber many times, city staff don't support those arrangements. They inevitably don't end well. So in this particular case, the group has held a long-term lease, peppercorn lease, and as part of that lease, they're responsible for the maintenance and the renewal of the building. And as often occurs with groups, they're using their expenditure to meet day-to-day operations, and often that upgrade and renewal of the infrastructure doesn't get a priority, and the city's assets are run down. And so, for those reasons, staff always recommend approach of looking at the net community benefit for the groups and their ability to pay, and the city actually doing the maintenance and managing the maintenance of our infrastructure so that we've got some control over it. So, and there's numerous occasions where groups with peppercorn leases, the infrastructure that's been handed back to us at the end of the lease has been in poor condition. But I guess having said that, I do believe this certainly is an extreme case, and the infrastructure is, very extensive, quite complex, and the expenditure to do that renewal and ongoing maintenance would be considerable. So it's certainly not intended as a criticism of the group that hasn't occurred. But for those reasons, we don't support those agreements. But it is, as was outlined, it is a state facility, so similar to the Midvale Cycle Dome and things like that, where the state government actually undertake the total management of it. And there is some, as outlined, there's some community use, but in relation to the actual expensive items, the majority of the cost relates to the state items. So the community use, the infrastructure involved in that, the cost is actually quite low. So, for those reasons that staff believe that the city shouldn't have to maintain and pay for a state facility. A couple of issues that Dwight and Ron raised, and certainly, I agree with a lot of what they said, and we've worked closely with them and to try to resolve this issue. And, they certainly are correct that facility brings in a lot of economic benefit to the Swan Valley. It's not just the people who live locally, but people do travel to use the facility. People, stay overnight. People spend money in the Swan Valley, so that certainly is correct. A number of issues were raised in relation to the lease in terms of insurance and adjustment, etc. And we agree there's issues. The lease is not satisfactory. The reason we haven't been rushing or we haven't sorted those things out is because there's no point entering into a lease with a group if they're not in operation. So the urgent thing is to, as they outlined, they can't continue to be in operation much longer. So these, I guess, the larger ownership model and things like that has to be sorted out before, before the issue of a lease is addressed. They raised the issue of lack of consultation with them in relation to the report, and while we have had some discussions with them, we got the information and wrote the report. But the reason for that is really we're on a pretty tight time frame. So we could go out and consult with the groups and the subgroups at least and things like that, and then bring it back to council. But by the time all of that happens, they're on a pretty tight time frame. They might not be in business for any much longer. So we did think it was important to bring the matter to council for some direction as soon as we could and as soon as we got the report from them. We believe the cost estimates prepared by Equestrian WA are on the low side. So the city, we believe that if we continue, it really boils down to if the city continues to own that infrastructure, we'll be responsible for it. We'll have a duty of care to maintain it in a safe condition, and that will cost a lot of money for the city to do. So that's really the bottom line. While we own it, it's our infrastructure. We should be maintaining it and upgrading it.
Councillor Henderson, question?
Well, I'm going to withdraw it and seek a deferral so that we can have the community consultation, because this is a big issue. And frankly, we've got a year to get our act together, so to speak. So I believe we should be looking more broadly at what the committee understands is happening, because frankly, I've spoken to some of the groups that didn't even know that this was on.
Well, with all that, you won't need to debate it. Yeah. Councillor Parry, you're next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Coden, just a very quick question.
It says in addition $14 million of redevelopment is proposed. When is that redevelopment proposing? Because it says 20 years and there's no timeline in regards to the $14 million, please.
That was money that the Equestrian WA was seeking federal and state funding for, so they would be looking at doing that as soon as they got, they got money for it. But there's not an immediate. But the work is required. So yeah, that was sort of some of their planning for it.
So that 14 million is at current time, and in the next 20 years they haven't budgeted anything else in regards to that. Am
The
I
14
right,
million was based on a report that was done, I think, a year or two ago. I think in 2017.
Councillor McMurray, do you have a comment, question?
Jim, have they actually provided us with accounts and financial statements for every year that they've been looking after that land from us?
I'd have to take that on notice. I don't believe, and with our new lease format, we do require that, but as part of the old peppercorn leases, we didn't require that. So I don't know that they would have, and I don't think they would have had an obligation to, but I will check on that.
We don't exactly. I mean, the question is then, how do we know how much they need if they don't know themselves and if they haven't supplied us that information from the point of view of their finances?
I think they're not under the lease, and again, I'll double check, but then I don't think they would be obliged to supply that information to us. Certainly as part of their submission, they have given us information on their, some detailed information on their costs and things like that. So they've had a consultant look at the background to help them prepare with these figures. So they have provided us with the information that they're obliged to provide us with. But in the new lease agreement that we recommend, that is a condition that we put on all groups, that they do supply us with that, so we do know how they're going financially.
Finally, Mr. Jim, the issue is for us to make a decision on whether to supply additional funds to this group, we need to know what they're doing with the money. So we need to know also that have a copy of that financial statement that they should be supplying us.
Can circulate the information.
Councillor Catalano, last question because we're running out of time.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask that one quick question about the Blackadder Creek one. Can I do that at some point, just quickly? I just want one
the Creek
question.
line's got nothing to do with the item. It's about
I
funding.
know, but I just want to just ask. Will we get a chance to do that, please?
You can ask Mr. Coaten.
Yeah,
still got a bit to do.
Might have to go behind closed doors.
Confidential item,
just one quick question.
It's a confidential item. We're going to shut it up. So I would suggest you ask Mr. Coaten offline because you've got 10 minutes to get finished. I need to move on, councillor. So you've still got one more to go, and then you've got to go through the item. So,
just a quick one for Mr. Coaten. Jim, sorry to get you back. Item the level crossing at Apple Street. Is there any funds in satellite development there for a contribution to that level crossing to have something done, or have they been approached? Given that they want to do the Clementine development, have they been approached to provide any?
Yeah, there is. Yes, as part of the agreement, the funding agreement for infrastructure in that area.
Beyond the DCP, any direct approach for that particular crossing?
Yeah, it's not a DCP. It's an agreement in relation to upgrades for infrastructure. So they're contributing to the roundabout at Great Northern and Apple, the rail crossing, some of the other infrastructure upgrades in the area.
So councillor's now going to run through the items that are wishing to be adjourned. Councillor Henderson's already indicated that he's going to withdraw 5.9. So first,
Mayor, while you're out of the room, Councillor Richardson had already withdrawn it.
Do you mind if I just work through it before you start interrupting? Thank you.
The first one you brought up.
Got a question about item 7.1. We're going to get a presentation on that.
No, I just cleared with the CEO. We're going to move on because you've got 9 minutes left. I want to run through all these items to get out of the way. And if there's any, before you start dictating me, if there's any time left, then we'll go back to it. So I'm going to work through the items to be withdrawn right now. Okay, so Councillor Henderson's already indicated that he's going to pull 5.9. So at this point in time, I'm just running down to items that have had deputations, and I'll go back to the previous page. So
4.6?
4.6.
4.1 and 4.3.
4.6 happens to be on the other page. So 4.1, and your attention is?
4.1. So I came out a little bit lost with this one.
It's demonstrated
option 2, which it would be to completely reject it.
Okay. Okay, the other items, councillors, 4.2, 4.3,
4.3
and your intention,
is going to be to add additional conditions.
amendment.
Yeah.
Okay, so 4.2, 5.8, 5.9, 7.1. Councillor Scanlon indicated she wants to withdraw 4.2, and I don't know what for. 13.4. No one?
Councillor Richardson.
If you want me to remind you, councillor, that's the artificial insemination thing in Bullsbrook. And I'm assuming that's for a refusal. Councillor Richards, I'm assuming that's for a refusal. Okay, that we could have done the last meeting. Okay, 4.1, Councillor Scanlon indicated she wants to do with that. And 4.2, likewise.
Oh, Mr Mayor, I've already said I want to do 4.1.
Well, yeah, she did say if you weren't doing it. 4.3 is taken care of. 4.7. 5.8. 5.9. Councillor Henderson's already withdrawn. Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry, 5.8, yes.
5.8. And you want to undo with it?
I have to see what, because the language of the motion's just...
So you don't understand the motion, so you want it to be Mr Copeland, is that it?
Yes, I'm
That
going
would be a
to, and
good
then
idea.
if I might make it a bit
Councillor,
easier to read.
we go back to those items that were not subject to a deputation of questions. Any items on the other remaining items to be withdrawn?
Possibly 5.5. Thank you.
Possibly 5.5, which is a
Thinking about Mr Mayor.
bus seat, so you don't really know what you want to do with it. Councillors, I'm assuming you've all read the agenda, so are there any other items? So you also the bus seat in the Vines? 5.6 you said? 4.6 is the, okay. And what do you want to do with it?
List, more than likely, option 2.
Okay, because there's only a recommendation there are. Okay, any others, councillors? None? All right, so we've got about 5 minutes left. Madam Acting CFO, you just want to quickly go back to your item.
Okay.
There's a highlight on that one.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So every 3 years, the CEO is required to review the systems and procedures around internal controls, risk management and legislative compliance, and that's called the Regulation 17 review. And the City engaged Deloitte to undertake that on behalf of the CEO. At the same time, we also had a risk management audit on the internal audit plan, and because there was so much overlap, we combined the two audits. It was a large audit. There were 9 findings and 17 recommendations. Now, most of these related to improvements with the city's risk management processes, including how we communicate and how we report on risk, how we advise the audit committee about risk, and how we train our staff about risk. And the report was presented to the audit committee, and they prioritised 3 of the recommendations, and they are to address the gaps in reporting to the audit committee to assist them in their monitoring function. It was to better define roles and responsibilities around audit and risk functions, and to leverage our new system to improve our risk reporting. Now, City officers have prepared an action plan to guide the implementation, and that will be reported to the audit committee on a quarterly basis. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any questions? Yes, Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, my question is about finding 6, which is to improve the city's IT disaster recovery plan. And I guess the question is, have we ever actually done a test of the disaster recovery plan?
Yes, we have.
We have.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we were actually required to trigger part of it yesterday.
But it wasn't a test, though, was it? If you had to do it.
We used it as a testing opportunity in that there were lots of opportunities for improvement based on how we performed in implementing the plan, and we'll feed that back into the review of the recovery plan.
Is there a plan to actually do a comprehensive disaster recovery test to confirm that the disaster recovery plan would actually work?
Mr Mayor, that's the intent.
All right. And is there a time frame for that?
I would have to check the due date on that item in this attachment.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you, councillors. On that note, we'll call the meeting quits. Have a good night. Drive home safely.